So, yeah, can't hear me like this. Can hear me like this. Okay. So. Okay, so and also a note, lots of people in the audience. And you have the agenda in front of you. Our last item of business, of course, is the one that most people have signed up to speak about. So, like if you were here last time, I said here's a great chance to learn about city government. You're going to learn about enterprise zones, garbage rates, and recycling rates. You're going to learn a lot of things here. So sit back and get ready for some democracy in action. So first is business from the public, and if I'm just understanding right, there's no one else here in the public that's going to speak to something not on the agenda, correct? Okay, double checking. Okay, then we are going to move first to our consent agenda. Items listed on the consent agenda are considered routine, and we may adopt them by one motion, and we may, unless we would like to remove one of them. So I would please ask the city recorder to read the items aloud.
The items on the consent agenda are as follows. The Woodburn City Council minutes of October 28th, 2019. Acceptance of a temporary public utility easement at 1800 West Hayes Street, Nellie Muir School, Woodburn, Oregon 97071. Acceptance of 2 public utility easements at 1800 West Hayes Street, Nellie Muir School, Woodburn, Oregon 97071. Acceptance of 2 warranty deeds at 1800 West Hayes Street, Nellie Muir School, Woodburn, Oregon 97071. Woodburn Gervais Enterprise Zone 5-year tax abatement agreement with Grading Pacific LLC. And Woodburn Gervais Enterprise Zone 5-year tax abatement agreement with INE Construction Incorporated.
Okay, is there anyone who would like to remove one of these items and for discussion?
Move we adopt the consent agenda.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. We adopt the consent agenda. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next, we are going to open a public hearing and hear from Republic Services about a rate increase. So I open the public hearing for Republican Services, and we have the staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've been talking with Republic Services about proposed rate increase, I think, for quite a long time. Dare I say, maybe even a year, something like that. It seems like it's been some time we've had back and forth on it. The council will know that the city holds a franchise agreement with Republic Services that provides the outline and the criteria for rate increases and rates of return on services and general operational procedures and relationship issues between the city and them. They've submitted information and it's been reviewed by staff. We feel that they've substantiated at least what they need to present to the city council in terms of the criteria of the franchise, and I think that's why they're here tonight. So we'll pass it on over to Republic Services. I know you've got a presentation. I'm not sure what order you want to go, so I'll just let you take it from here.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Scott. Mayor, Council, my name is KJ Lewis. I'm the Municipal Relationship Manager for Republic Services, and I was last before Council this summer talking about the state of the recycling market. It's nice to be back. I've brought with me my colleagues.
Will Mathias, I'm the Finance Manager for Republic Services.
Jay Lawson, I'm the Operations Manager for the location here in Woodburn.
And Jay is going to start off by telling you about some of the services here in Woodburn.
Yeah, so if you look at the first slide, it's really a slide that I think we bring every time we come to council, just talking about, the number of routes, trucks, drivers that we use to service the city, just a snapshot of the tonnage that, we're picking up and kind of how that falls. I think what I'd really rather is that we have 13 employees that live here in Woodburn. Those are employees that have been long-term employees for us, and so they contribute to the economy here at Woodburn. One of the things, I've been with Republic 2.5 years, that impressed me from the start is the amount of pride that my employees take. They take pride in themselves and their truck, in the facility, in our customers, in each other, and they're really proud to service the cities that we service. We're in Woodburn twice a week with these trucks and these drivers, and there's just a lot of pride that they take in this city and the service that they provide to the city. If we move on to the next slide, this is just a partial list of the partnership that we have with Woodburn. I'm not going to tell my story here tonight. I've done it before with some of you, but I specifically sought out Republic because of the way that they partner with communities. That was the company that I wanted to work for. So many of you know of all the things that we partner with in the city. We're always looking for other greater, more opportunities to partner with the city and just what's happening. Mayor and I have just been chatting recently about your tree lighting. I would love to get involved in your tree lighting. And our employees like to take a lot of pride in the city of Woodburn, and so they also get involved in a lot of these different projects that we do. So we're really here tonight to talk about a request for a rate increase, so I'm going to let Will kind of guide you through some of those numbers.
So, good evening, Council. Our last rate increase was in 2016. At that time, there was a large increase at the burner, which brought us in here, and the request at that time was in the 12% range. Since that time, our profitability has declined, and you can see from 2016 from 2017, 18, the current year, and then we have the forecasted projection for 2020. Our profitability has declined from 8.4% down to 3.8%. And so our rate increase is really to realign us with what's kind of considered in this area the right range of profitability for our industry, which is 8 to 12%. The increase that we're requesting gets us to the midpoint of that range by the end of 2020. From an expense perspective, year over year, 2017 to 2018, you can see we've had some line items increase and some decrease. The ones that have decreased would be the ones that show with the negative number in front. But I'll touch on some of the increases first. We had a slight increase in vehicle operating costs, which was fuel increases year over year from 2017 to 2018, an increase in our insurance cost, and that's insurance related to claims. We had one claim that hit us in 2018 that drove that up a little bit. And then our other operating costs, the number's big, the dollar figures aren't as big, but that's an increase in our heavy highway tax related to the vehicle weight of our trucks. And then the big one, and the reason that's really driving this request the most, is disposal and recycling. Our disposal costs, our rate is fixed at the burner, but our recycling cost has gone up quite a bit. And KJ was in here, as she said earlier in the year, and discussed some of the changes in recycling markets that are driving that. But we've seen recycling cost skyrocket, and that's impacted us the most. But we have seen some savings as well. That in repairs and maintenance, we usually don't see a savings. Our trend is usually up a little bit every year, but we have a great team that takes good care of the trucks, and they also take care of it at a reasonable cost. So we've had a decrease in facility cost as well, and then a slight decrease in depreciation. So then for 2020, we've taken a 5-year compound annual growth rate of cost, what our cost increases have been, kind of applied that across the board to just get to or for 2019, to get to a 2019 forecasted expense. So on this slide, you'll see I'll explain each one of the 3 lines. So first, in the light blue, the baby blue line, that's the Cumulative West Region CPI index, what that's been since 2009, so over the last 10-year period. In the dark blue, I'll touch on the red next. The red is CPI, but it includes In 2016, the one-time increase at the burner for 30% of a disposal increase to us. That was passed through in the rates at that time. The dark blue line, that would be what the cumulative rate increase is that we've received from Woodburn in that same time frame. So you'll see up until 2016, we followed pretty closely with that red line of CPI plus the burner increase. And just in the last few years, we've started to lag behind a little bit, which has, again, affected our profitability. Okay, so,
Can I ask a quick question?
yes, sir.
CPI, Consumer Price Index?
Yes,
Just making sure.
that's correct. Yeah.
I've found recently people use different acronyms for all sorts of things, so.
Yeah, and that's the basic West Region CPI, so.
So when Marion County increased the burn rate, you said it was like 30%, if I remember reading correctly in the staff report. Should we have been at Marion County's meeting saying, as a consumer, not as city council, but saying, hey, you're gonna jack rates up 30%, which is eventually gonna put you guys in front of us saying, hey, we need an increase. Is that something that we should be doing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
Does anybody show up? Did you guys go to that meeting by any chance?
So I'm new back to the market.
Okay.
But that's why I kind of looked at Jay or
Yeah, well, and
someone.
I unfortunately came on just after that increase.
Sorry.
But yes, absolutely. I would absolutely have encouraged at the time to.
Maybe it's a better rhetorical
go to that,
question
yeah.
than checking you guys
Yeah.
on that. But I was just thinking as I read that, I'm like, well, that puts you guys in front of us, you know, basically. And Marion County is they represent us, so maybe we should be having some conversations because they're just pushing their costs onto you, onto us.
That's right, because that's such a huge cost. Our disposal costs are 40 to 50% of our cost structure, and so not a cost that we can easily absorb.
Thank you for letting me interrupt.
Yes, sir.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to take you back to Table 2, which you have skipped over, but it's in the information that you provided to us.
Direct expenses, sir, or
Table
statement
2,
of income?
Which refers to your cost of operations, salaries, administration, taxes, things of that nature.
Councilor Carney, just to clarify for Republic Services, it's Table 2 in the staff report.
Okay.
One of the things I noticed in here is that your projected cost of operations in 2020 with no rate change is $4,830,820, and 2020 with a rate change is $5,062,256, which is actually a couple of $100,000 more. I don't understand the reasoning of why your administrative costs would change with or without a rate change.
So the only cost that would really change with the rate increase is the franchise fee that we pay to the city, and then our state and federal income taxes.
I see. And I understand that you fund your capital replacement program through operating revenue?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so it's not part of your budgeted amount? It's not something you budget as part of operations?
No, sir, it's not. You'll see the depreciation line really carries the cost of capital, but we fund it through revenue. Yeah.
Okay, very good. I have no further questions. Thank
Thanks,
you.
sir. So here we have just rate comparisons of what we see in other jurisdictions nearby to Woodburn. So we have Mount Angel, Aurora, Hubbard, Silverton, who we currently have a proposal in front of, and then Woodburn's current and proposed rates. And one thing that may stick out is that Mount Angel's rates are a little bit lower on all lines of business. That really has everything to do with the franchise fee. Theirs is at 3%. All these other jurisdictions are at 5%. But you can see that Woodburn's proposed rates compare favorably with the rates of the other cities. Things may be distributed a little differently in cities. They choose to subsidize lines of business maybe in a little bit different way, but by and large, the rates are pretty comparable, Woodburn's proposed rates, to these other cities that are nearby as well. Okay, and then here we have just a pie chart of where 35-gallon customer, where their monthly rate goes to. And so you can see that the biggest portion of that is disposal and recycling. So this really speaks to the recycling cost, the burner rate that we pay. The second largest is other things that fall into gross operating expenses, repairs and maintenance, fuel, things like that. The third largest is labor, then G&A, and then our profit is 8.2%. We have the franchise fee at 5%, and then we have the smallest portion, which is taxes. So in 2019, based on where we're projected to be, that the profit line actually shrinks from $2.13 down to $1.56. And lastly, I'd like to touch on, before I turn it over to KJ, the increase itself, this is for a 35-gallon cart, just as an example, is 29 cents per lift. We drive by and do 2.5 lifts per week at a residential household. That's one waste lift, one yard debris lift, and a recycling lift every other week. So that's a 29 cent per lift increase for 35-gallon customers.
How much? Anybody doing the math on that? I was trying to think that through real quick. Like,
Sure, it's
Here.
excuse me. It's the increase being the difference, the 29.25 and the 26.12. So what, $3.13 divided by 2.5 times 4.33, the sum of that. And
you're obviously a finance guy.
I am. I'm
I'm
totally
a retail
finance.
guy, so I was following you for a second. I was just trying to figure, if you're looking for a 12% increase and my garbage bill is like $74 every couple months, it's like $9 more every bill. Does that sound about right?
So you receive a bill for 2 months at a time?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't think it would depend on the level of service you have. If you have a 35-gallon container, it would be $6 and change.
Okay.
So if you have a larger container, it's probably something more along the lines of maybe $7 to $8.
Okay. Because I think that's what most, I don't know what everybody else is thinking, but.
That's what I'm trying to do.
If I'm sitting in the home or I'm watching on Facebook at home, that's, I'm looking, how much are we talking about realistically? And God bless you, 29 cents a lift, that sounds really cheap, but it's like, well, what's that? Is that gonna buy me a new car in this process? Or, I mean, that's just what I'm trying to wrap my head around, so
Yeah.
thank you for that.
You bet.
Mr. Mayor, if I'll ask a question, if you want to answer it later, you can, if you're going to get to it. But I was looking at your recycling and disposable cost, and we know that the market for commodities has just crashed and burned. It became a revenue stream to a cost item for you the last couple of years for sure. So my first question is, and maybe you're going to get to this, but do you see that recovering down the road, or is that going to be an opportunity maybe lost forever? And then the other, just a general question, Mr. Mayor, I wanted to ask, if you can answer whenever you'd like, but we've been following a little bit through Marion County potential threat to the burner in terms of its carbon emissions and regulations, that potentially we could lose that as a tipping point. What would that do to our cost? I can't imagine that it wouldn't be shocking for most people in Marion County. So I just want to ask that question, and you can answer those whenever you would like. But those are probably the two biggest things that I hear about. What does it cost to me? But also, what happens if we lose the burner? And how many hundreds of percents more increases will we have over what we currently pay? And then also, just the commodities market in terms of recycling.
Sure. So do you want to take the commodities market?
Sure.
I didn't mean to interrupt your presentation. You can answer it whenever you'd like. So.
It's okay.
You're fine. I'll attempt to share what I know, and the answer is it's changing. Different markets are being found, and it changes all the time. There's discussions at a higher level about developing new markets, even domestically. It is uncertain. It is unclear.
Okay.
And I would add to that, I think really the way that I foresee it is that we'll more likely stabilize and that will be what recovery looks like, as opposed to continuing to get worse.
I guess I would just encourage you, and I think you've done a good job, but community education about recyclable material will certainly help that, so that people are properly recycling and we're not losing loads. And that's an important revenue stream to help control future rate increases down the road. We sure felt that when that market flipped. So I'd say keep up the good work and keep at that education piece in terms of that.
Yeah, as far as the education goes, we are actively working on education at all levels. Not to take us down that road here, but the company has also just put out some great educational material for educators that's available to them. Maybe that's even for a future presentation. But just to answer your question and to touch on the burner. Those obviously conversations that we've had. There's been a lot of conversation around that, and really the only thing I could say at this point is that we do have a contingency plan. There wouldn't be any interruptions whatsoever.
Well, that's good to know. Does that contingency plan, would that include additional cost?
At this point, I don't believe so.
Really? Oh,
Yes.
that's great.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, I'll turn it over to KJ.
I'll just wrap up with a few slides about our company. Here's some awards that we've won. I'd like to point out that we've won we've been part of the list of the world's most ethical companies for 3 years in a row. Yeah, no, that's fine. This is just a slide that's about industry awards. So we've won 75% of the Driver of the Year awards in the large company category since 2009. And I also should point out, it's not on this slide, but we have a 42% better safety record than the industry average. So we take it very seriously, the training of our drivers and the safety of your community. Here's a little bit about diversity and inclusion programs that the company promotes. Strong commitment to veterans and strong commitment to women at all levels. And this is a fun thing that the company does. We have it's to test driver safety skills, and so we have local rodeos, we call them, and then the winners of those can go on to compete at the national level. And it's kind of a big deal. Everybody brings their family, and it's difficult and challenging and fun.
Awesome.
Is it open to the public?
You know, I asked that question. I'm also new. I asked that question this year, and
I think it hasn't been in the past, but we did discuss this year opening it to the public. So we are hopeful that we can do that in the future.
I think it would be really fun.
Thanks.
It's just Thursdays or Fridays at my house.
And Mr. Mayor, maybe I should, since I interrupted the presentation, maybe I'd also like to say just before we are done with the presentation, how much we at the staff level appreciate the relationship, the access that we have, and your participation with us, and particularly in our downtown efforts and the LA Way efforts. It continues to be really positive, and it doesn't go unnoticed, at least from our end. We don't hesitate to call you when we need something, and you always deliver on that. So I do appreciate that. It's worth calling out. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Okay, thank you very much. Is there any testimony by proponents? Any testimony by opponents? All right, with that, I will close the public hearing. Council discussion?
Well, I'm always excited to get my garbage rates to go up. I was just kind of adjusting, but I know it's been a while since the rates have been adjusted, but I also got a bigger garbage can, which increased the price of my service. But, I think this is one of the most awkward conversations we have as a city council when we're talking, water is a very similar conversation. None of us want to increase prices, and most people, does Wave come before? I don't think Wave Broadband comes before us and says, hey, we're raising the cable rates, but
Right.
Thank goodness. It is just an awkward conversation because we're all personally probably paying for part of that franchise through our own spending, and we also have to look out for constituents, but they've laid out a good case for why it's, necessary to do it. And every time they've come, I've been reluctant to say, yeah, we gotta increase prices, but it's a compelling argument that you can't just ignore that. So they do provide a quality service, and my interactions not only on a monthly basis, but when we had a giant container at my house, it was great service. So I appreciate that from you guys, but I don't appreciate the fact we have to raise rates. And if there was something I could do to change that, I would do it. But in good conscience, from my perspective, we can't do that.
That's this thing?
So,
Cool. Sorry.
one, I do want to thank you for your service to Woodburn. The list that you gave us was long, and I know that many of those events I've been a part of, and it is nice to know that we have a companionship and partnership with Republic Services that can provide that. Like Councilor Morris, I am not fond of saying, yeah, let's raise my rates, because I have to pay them just like everybody else. But I did go a little bit further through the staff report, and I did find that if you have a 20-gallon, no frills, no recycling, your rate will go up $2.75 per month. If you have the Mac Daddy 90-gallon can, the biggest can, your rates will go up $5.03 a month. So most of us are, for a 2-month period, are going to be looking at between $6 and $8. Just kind of put it in perspective. You do a lot to give back to this community. I do appreciate the fact that a lot of your employees work directly for Woodburn. I like the fact that you do hire locally, and you do give back to our community. So I'm very appreciative of the work that you do. As Councilor Morris said, it's nice knowing that my garbage goes away. When it doesn't work, we all get the phones ringing. When it does work, it's fabulous. So I just wanted to say thank you and kind of put it into perspective. We're talking about $2.75 to $5, depending on how large your can is.
Else? Good.
I just wanted to make a comment. I really appreciate the quality of the content of your presentation. I went through everything, and I believe that I have an understanding of the type of challenges that you're facing in the marketplace these days. So once again, I really appreciate the information that you provided to us. It gave us a better understanding of just exactly what you see day to day. Thank you.
So I'll end with just
I do have a comment.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you for being so reliable. I know I can count on you, and if I get missed or something, you're right there to help me out, and I just really appreciate that, because it helps keep my life more in control if I know my garbage is getting taken care of.
So this echoes everyone's comment. The city council never wants to approve rate increases for anything. My son-in-law's in the Air Force in northern Alaska, and they figure out what to do with their own garbage. So the other thing is, besides, instead of paying an extra $3 a month, figure it out yourself. But I do want to mention that our state representative Teresa Alonso Leon contacted you about the rate increase and was worried about the people that couldn't pay it. We related the program that Love Inc. has with water, and then talked with KJ. Just everyone's openness to working with people who this might be a burden upon is something that we can do. And I've been firsthand witness to the kind of community activities that are happening. In fact, Jay, 2 days ago, was talking to our superintendent of public schools, and hey, how about the education piece? Can you work that in? And then finally, I'm a fan of organizational health, which is organizational fun. So a rodeo, I know that's good for business, and it's good for the people you work with, and it's good for our community. So thank you for being part of such a good organization.
I
All right.
have actually one
Yes,
question. So if this goes through, will you be sending out letters letting them know when it will be affected? Like the rate increase?
We usually send notices, so I just want to
Okay.
confirm because I haven't.
And it would be in as many languages as our,
Correct.
okay.
Yeah, And when I was talking to your representative, she also let me know about the radio station that Piccoon
yeah.
has that, that would be great. However, it's easiest for us to get the information out to the people that need to know is,
Perfect, thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so our recommended action was to do this. We are going to now move to, we're going to go in and out of these public hearings, and that public hearing was closed. And we're going to go straight to this particular matter, which is a resolution approving of the adjusted rate schedule, which is Council Bill
Council-
3112.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to introduce Council Bill number 3112.
Council Bill 3112 has been duly introduced and is a resolution, and as such requires one reading, and we please have the reading by title only if there's no objection.
Council Bill number 3112, a resolution approving an adjusted rate schedule for providing solid waste service within the city of Woodburn and repealing Resolution 2087.
Okay, there's one more opportunity for council discussion, but since we discussed, I'm going to hear quick silence as none. May we please have a roll call vote?
Counselor Morris?
Aye.
Counselor Carney?
Aye.
Counselor Ellsworth?
Aye.
Counselor Schaub?
Aye.
Counselor Cabrales?
Aye.
Counselor Cornwell?
Yes.
Council Bill 3112 has been duly passed. Thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you for coming. Okay, our next is a supplemental budget request for creation of the PERS site account, which we heard about before. And so I'm going to open that public hearing for FY 219-20 supplemental budget request for the creation of a PERS site account. We've
Thank-
already had the staff report.
We
Anything to
did,
add?
Mr. Mayor. I just point out a few highlights here. This is the supplemental budget that will make the adjustments attached as Exhibit A on here for the $733,000 that we talked about as part of the ORA. I don't have anything else to add to that unless we'd like to go over the entire presentation again for people in the audience. Just kidding. Sandra,
He was kidding.
I don't think there's anything else to add other than complete this hearing and then adopt the attached resolution.
Okay, so we'll give a chance, any testimony of proponents of this? Opponents? Okay, we'll close the public hearing. Any more council discussion? You are free to go, Ms. Montoya. Okay, so now, once again, we'll move to this next item for a vote.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that, I introduce Council Bill number 3113.
Council Bill 3113 has been duly introduced and is a resolution, and as such requires one reading, and may we please have the reading by title only if there's no objection.
Council Bill number 3113, a fiscal year 2019-2020 resolution approving $733,333 in transfers of appropriations in various funds and approving the creation of a site account through the contribution of $2,823,043 to PERS.
All right, one more chance for discussion. Hearing none, may we please have a roll call vote?
Counselor Cabrales?
Aye.
Counselor Ellsworth?
Aye.
Counselor Cornwell?
Yes.
Aye. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Counselor Schaub?
Aye.
Counselor Carney?
Aye.
Counselor Morris?
Aye.
All right, Council Bill 3131 has been duly passed. Thank you very much. We're going to move swiftly on to the next public hearing, which is the expansion of the Woodburn Gervais Enterprise Zone. I would like to open that public hearing, and may we have a staff report?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and City Councilors. I'm Jamie Jonk, the Economic Development Director for the City of Woodburn. Tonight, we're bringing forth an opportunity to expand the Woodburn Gervais Enterprise Zone. The City of Woodburn adopted a zone in 2010 and brought brought the Gervais District on in 2014. with the city's expansion of the urban growth boundary, those lands that were brought into the city's UGB have not been included in the enterprise zone. Currently, we have approximately 108 acres that have been annexed into the city limits, and in order to provide a tax abatement incentive for prospective businesses on that land, we will need to do an enterprise zone boundary expansion to include that. Staff did go and participate during in city council meeting in the city of Gervais, and that was last Thursday, and they did pass the resolution for their part of the Gervais, Woodburn Gervais Enterprise Zone boundary expansion. So tonight we're asking city council to consider approving the resolution for the Woodburn City Gervais Enterprise Zone boundary expansion.
Okay. All right, any questions for Jamie at this point?
Is that going to get us a giant corporation coming in?
That's what we're shooting for. Every little bit helps.
Okay, thank you.
Well, speaking of, the next place is to ask for testimony from proponents. And we have Mr. Greg Specht here, who would like to speak to this.
Mr. Mayor, councilors, good evening. My name is Greg Specht. My address is 10260 Southwest Greenberg Road in Portland. I come before you this evening to speak in favor of expanding the Woodburn Gervais Enterprise Zone to include the 108 acres on the west side of I-5 in the Southwest Industrial Reserve area. Of those 108 acres, we have purchased 60 and hold an option on the remaining 48 acres. I support this resolution for several reasons. We are in the business of competing for users of industrial space, and we do so throughout the region. Many other jurisdictions have designated their industrial lands as enterprise zones, including Portland, Gresham, Hillsborough, and especially Salem. Of particular note, we have, and we continue to compete with the 600-acre Mill Creek Corporate Center in Salem, all of which is designated an enterprise zone. To not be able to offer the same benefits as our competition does put us at a competitive disadvantage. By way of example, we met on site on the property last week with a undisclosed 690,000 square foot prospect who was looking for a new home for up to 1,200 employees. Their first question to me was, is the land entitled? I said yes. Their second question was, what incentives are available? I said, we're working with the city to expand the enterprise zone. Virtually the entire city of Woodburn is already an enterprise zone, so it would certainly appear the city is more than comfortable with the enterprise zone concept. And that supports the position that it is reasonable to extend the designation to this newly annexed land. We recently completed the speculative development of our 730,000 square foot Vista Logistics Park in Gresham, and we were able to land a 115,000 square foot tenant due to the benefits of the property being located in an enterprise zone. You should know that we are currently pursuing the option of developing a 500,000 square foot speculative building on about 30 acres of the land we already own. If we do proceed with this type of development, I am certain our partners and lenders will require that the property be included in the city's enterprise zone. Finally, it's worth noting that our engineers estimate the scale of development, should it occur, will generate approximately $1.7 million in fees and revenue to the city of Woodburn. So there are significant financial benefits to the city by just getting a project of this magnitude to the starting line. I believe we're all on the same page in our pursuit of new industrial jobs coming to Woodburn. Expanding the enterprise zone in the Southwest Industrial Reserve area will help us achieve that goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Specht. Appreciate you coming all the way down here to encourage us in this endeavor. So, any other proponents? Testimony from opponents? Any questions for people before we close the hearing? Hearing none. The public hearing is now closed.
Thank you.
Any discussion from the council?
this property would just be for industrial structures, not like shopping places to go shopping. I'm not going to name any Trader Joe's or something like that.
That's correct.
It'll just be for industrial.
That's correct,
or
Counselor.
transfer, like what's there already.
Industrial zone property.
And this has been, when they started more than a decade ago to expand the UGB, like this very moment was a goal, I believe, of people who sat here in the previous decade. Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to introduce Council Bill number 3114.
Council Bill 3114 has been duly introduced and is a resolution, and such requires one reading. And may we please have the reading by title only if there's no objection.
Council Bill number 3114, a resolution for Woodburn Gervais Enterprise Zone boundary change.
One more opportunity for discussion. May we please have a roll call vote?
Counselor Carney?
Aye.
Counselor Cornwell?
Yes.
Counselor Morris?
Aye.
Counselor Schaub?
Aye.
Counselor Ellsworth?
Aye.
Counselor Cabrales?
Aye.
All right, Council Bill 3114 has been duly passed. Thank you, sir. We're going to next move to an award for a contract for the final design of the I-5 pump station and force main upgrades to Murray Smith Incorporated. Is there a staff report on this, or do you want to say a word?
Oh, yes, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to ask our city engineer, Eric Wilquist, to approach with a staff report. He's promised that it should take less than 2 hours for his staff report this evening.
Good evening,
Another
Mayor,
attempt at humor.
City Council members. This is the continuation. I don't know if you remember back in March that City Council awarded the preliminary design phase for the I-5 lift station, pump station, and force main upgrades. That's been completed, so now we're proceeding towards final design, and we're kind of combining these two large projects into one. So when you look at that value of $537,000, it appears like a lot, but this is two very large multi-million-dollar projects being combined into one. So this will get us to bidding this particular contract award.
Any questions?
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we award the contract for final design services to the I-5 pump station and force maintenance upgrades to Murray Smith, Inc.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Okay, before our next public hearing, I encourage everybody to stretch a little bit. Yeah, we need a perfect. Okay, before we go to the next public hearing, I do have an update. This is the two Woodburn, our girls and boys soccer teams are in the semifinals tonight. One's right over here, and the girls have just defeated the North Marion Huskies, who had defeated them earlier in the season. After like upsetting the number one seed like last week, and so now they're in the finals for the first time since wherever. And the boys are ahead 2-0, and we're still waiting for the final update there. So if I whoop and holler, it's because my son's on the boys team, and I want to interrupt the public hearing. Okay. So next, this is a public hearing, and there's going to be a little bit of reading about all this. And so I want to thank the people that have come to speak, and there's a lot of you, and so we'll be first hearing a presentation, and let me get my notes because we are going to make sure this is done well. So, and this is my first one. Okay, so I will now open the public hearing for the Valley Pacific Apartments DR 2019-03 and consolidated applications. I will first ask the Commission if anyone has had an ex parte contact with the applicant or another individual in which this application was discussed.
Mr. Mayor, how how do you declare that formula? I had a citizen approach me and wanted to talk about this issue, and I told them that I could not, and I emphatically told them I could not. I think that's the first time since I've been on council that somebody's approached me about a potential or a quasi-judicial issue. Also, I go by this place 2 times every day, so that's what I got.
There we have it. Okay. Anyone else?
I drive by it a couple times a month. I scrolled through Facebook and I saw that there was a brief Pamplin, Woodburn Independent article that this was occurring. I think I told somebody at work today, this is potentially going to be a long city council meeting because we've got a land use hearing, and that's about the extent of my conversations about this.
All right. Anyone else?
I'm like Lisa, I drive by it frequently. I paid attention to the large tree that's kind of centered there that when I read about it, they were talking about trees that they were gonna keep and might have to go, and that's about all.
All right. So the next question is any site visits, but I believe that's covered by, we have people having driven by it. No one's walked the land.
Oh, I've walked by it.
Okay, and walked by it.
On the sidewalk.
On the sidewalk.
Before it became an issue and they put all the fences up, so, yeah.
All right.
Be perfectly transparent.
Okay, and then I will next ask, is there any other conflict or bias that would preclude you from making an impartial decision on this application? Hearing silence, I will take that as a no. And then any challenges from the audience on the basis of any disclosure or omission by our commission? Excellent. Okay, staff will now read the quasi-judicial land use hearing statement.
Both Oregon law and the Woodburn Development Ordinance govern evidentiary quasi-judicial land use hearings and require that at the commencement of the hearing, this statement be read to all persons in attendance. The applicable substantive criteria for this land use decision are listed in the staff report and are as follows. WDO 2.03, 2.06, 2.07, 3.01 through 3.07, 4.01.07, 5.01.08, 5.03.02, and 5.03.12. The hearing will proceed in the following general order: staff report, applicant's presentations, testimony in favor of the application, testimony in opposition to the application, rebuttal, closure of record, deliberation, and decision. All testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed toward the applicable substantive criteria just stated or other criteria in a plan or land use regulation that the person believes to apply to the decision. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Failure of the applicant to raise a constitutional or other issue relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Any party wanting a continuance or to keep the record open must make that request while the record is open.
Thank you. We will now have the presentation of the staff report.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. I'm Chris Kerr, the Community Development Director. Colin Cortez, the Senior Planner, has been working on this. He'll be doing the presentation. I'll be assisting him as we go along.
Good evening, Council. Project before you tonight is called Pacific Valley Apartments, consisting of 3 land use application types: design review, property line adjustment, and a number of variances. The issue before you is those 3 applications, And as some background, you as the council had decided to call up this item. It was a planning commission decision made October 10th by the commission. And as a formality, I'd like to take this moment to enter the planning commission decision document, staff report from the planning commission, the attachments of that report, and the applicant revisions that the applicant will be submitting momentarily and had given staff earlier in the day, all into the record. So it's formally part of the record. Basic chronology, there's 3 basic dates. The first that I just mentioned is the Planning Commission decision, which was October 10th. The commission did unanimously approve the project with the staff analyses and findings that went with them and with the recommended conditions of approval. On October 22nd, staff went ahead and supported the commission's decision by notifying the applicant, landowner, and those who testified at the commission hearing of the commission's approval in writing. And then October 28th was the date that the council, by a 3-2 vote, voted to call up the item for review prior to the end of the appeal period. Getting into the project itself, I'll spend a number of slides about the overall project, and I'll get more detail into the variances a little later after that. The site is at the intersection of where North Pacific Highway meets Alexandra Avenue. It's a T intersection. It's owned by a developer. And the project is for 204 apartments across 10 buildings, which are conventional for this type of construction. So there are 3-story walk-up buildings with open-air central stairwells. And it will have a central building that serves as a clubhouse/leasing office. It also includes a very wide sidewalk. The standard would be for 6 feet. The developer is volunteering to build an 8-foot sidewalk along Pacific Highway, and also to provide a public bicycle pedestrian path, which staff is calling Jacobson Path, for a long vacated street in the vicinity, along the westerly south side of the project, and to place in an easement to provide for public access. As far as site context, on the left you see an image from the zoning map. The property is highlighted in the yellow band. The property is zoned commercial general, which is the city's most accommodating district for commercial uses. On the right, you see an aerial view of the property from recent times. It is essentially an open field with some trees at the moment, and the property is 6.67 acres. This is a close-up of that aerial view. You can see some items that might be more familiar coming into view. On this slide, you'll see some notes guiding you. So up here, you'll see the building that was Choose Eatery is vacant at the moment. Up here, you'll see the parking area for the Assembly Hall of Jehovah's Witnesses. Towards the east, the property abuts the Country Acres Estates subdivision, which was platted in 1978. Here to the southeast is Nelson Park. And then to the south of the property is Owl's Garden and Hoe. These are some photos from staff site visit. Top left is a photo out across the highway to Alexandra Avenue. To the right is a view more or less in the middle of the site looking east. Bottom left is a view north along the existing narrow curb-tight sidewalk along the highway. And in the bottom center is a picture of the largest, tallest tree on the site that the applicant is proposing to save and is conditioned to be saved. This is a courtesy of the applicant. It's an artist 3-dimensional rendering of what the project more or less would look like. This is a bird's eye view looking towards the southeast, over and across Highway 99. And this is a world known to staff, the flat 2-dimensional black and white site plan world. So let me give you a little tour. On the left, this is Pacific Highway. You see in gray shading the 10 buildings of the complex. Basically, all the lettered buildings are the apartment buildings. And then this represents the clubhouse leasing office. There's also a play area and a barbecue pit. The remainder of the area does consist of pavement, drive aisles, parking, walkways, the sort of thing you would expect if you visited any new apartment complex pretty much anywhere in the country in recent years. And then this outer part is, of course, the boundary of the project itself. This highlights specifically where the 8-foot pavement would be for the Jacobson Path. It would extend from the sidewalk to about halfway and hook up with the walkway system for the apartment complex. The applicant is proposing an easement along the entire south side of the property, with the idea that the path could continue to a later date and ultimately make its way south to Greenview Drive. This is an excerpt from the applicant's elevations of the buildings. You can see they would look pretty much like most new apartment buildings look. This one has a variety of colors. And then this is a close-up. It is fiber cement siding. Most people know it as hardy plank. And the clubhouse would also have some ornamental stone along some of its front. Diving into the landscaping, this is the west half of the project. Besides the 8-foot sidewalk, the applicant is also putting in street trees. I should back up a moment. The applicant is going to remove the degraded curb-tight sidewalk, put in a new planter strip of 6 feet with street trees and shrubbery, pour a new 8-foot sidewalk, and then in the front yard of the site have very lush landscaping of ground cover, some grass, lots of shrubbery and trees. Lots of landscaping out front. This will be one of the better frontages along the highway. You also can make out, based on the circle symbols, a lot of other trees in the vicinity, and you might be able to make out these smaller symbols which indicate shrubbery. Moving on to the east side of the property, the east rear, you see a similar arrangement. And the applicant did, based on the comments that the council received at the call-up meeting, the applicant had worked on a plan in response to neighbor concerns and had given that to staff today, and staff was able to include it in the presentation. The applicant will be showing the next few images as well as myself. So right now you're seeing what was proposed and approved by the Planning Commission. I want you to focus on building C here. This would have been the one along the east rear property line, set back 10 feet, with 2 rows of evergreen shrubbery and a number of trees in this yard. The next slide will transition to what the applicant is now going to propose. Oh, I should back up. That's 2 slides ahead. So this summarizes the issue of what seems to be the concern of the neighbors. So based on past commentary and specifically testimony from the Planning Commission hearing, it appears to be about Building C and its height and proximity to houses at 1235, 1281, and 1297 Greenview Drive, which are houses and properties adjacent to the project on the east side. This is a close-up of the aerial showing the 6 lots that directly abut the property in question. And we can return to that image later if need be. So back again to what was originally proposed and approved. And now the slide will transition to what the applicant will be proposing. You'll see that Building C has pivoted away from the east rear property line. There is a southeast corner where the building is at 10 feet, but the remainder of the building is farther away now than what was going to be originally proposed. And now I'll also superimpose an image courtesy of the applicant that brings to colorful life the landscaping changes that come with that. Compared to the original, which I'll go back to for a second, you'll see the landscape buffer there represented, and has become quite thicker and more dense with this proposal than is originally proposed and approved. So this seems to staff to go quite a ways to addressing the neighbor concerns based on this image. And lastly, this also courtesy of the applicant shows the nature of the shrubbery and trees to be proposed. So the bottom left is an image of the cypress tree species proposed. You can see it's tall, it's thick, and it is indeed evergreen. And the shrubbery is of similar character. The applicant also provided an exhibit that essentially gets across the point that the setbacks, whether you measure them to property line or to the actual houses, are greater than what they were in the original proposal. Moving on to the world of the development ordinance, the staff report that staff presented to the Planning Commission had a document called Analyses and Findings, which are analyses of how does this project meet or not meet the development ordinance, and where it does not meet the ordinance, or could, staff proposes what's called a condition of approval, meaning the project could meet this item on the condition that something or other. Moving on to the other mechanics of the application, I mentioned a property line adjustment. It's very simple. The property is composed of 2 lots. They're divided north and south, and the applicant's simply proposing to flip a property line so the property is divided east and west. Getting into the variances, there are 7 requests for the project. The applicant did provide arguments in support of each, and staff had recommended approval with conditions, and the commission had approved them in that way. This is a list. There are 7 of them. Staff believes that of these 2 would be of interest for tonight's discussion. I'll go through them, all of them briefly. So the first one relates to a requirement that if a development is large enough, essentially, it requires 2 points of access to a public street. The difficulty with this site, as you might remember from the image, is that it's essentially a landlocked lot. The only frontage is along the highway. It's surrounded by development to the north, south, and east. On top of that, the code and policies that the city has to promote traffic safety also limit the number and spacing of driveways along the highway, as you might imagine. So there's some conflict there. So for that reason, staff supported a request by the applicant to have only 1 driveway aligned with Alexandra Avenue for both functional and safety purposes. The second one was driveway minimum number. Similar but slightly different requirement. Ordinarily, this development required 2 driveways, but based on this context, that wouldn't make sense. So staff recommended approval of the variances the applicant requested. The third one is parking ratio minimum. The standard in the code is 2 stalls per dwelling, any kind of dwelling, house, apartment, whatever. And the applicant proposed a slightly lesser amount, equivalent to 1.85 stalls per unit. And that was based on the fact that the applicant wanted to fit both units and parking on the site, which in turn is premised on the fact that in most small city suburban markets, it's always cheaper to build surface parking than underground or structured parking. And so there comes a point where you have to find, as a developer, a balance between putting actual buildings and then placing surface parking. Staff was in support of that, and there'll be a number of slides later that go into more detail about why that was. The fourth one is compact parking. The normal maximum is that 20% of parking can be in the form of compact stalls, and the applicant obtained approval for 60%. Number 5 is drive aisle minimum width. Where necessary, some of the drive aisles are 26 feet based on Oregon Fire Code for this type of construction. The remainder of the drive aisles can be 20 feet instead of 24 feet as required by the code. Still perfectly functional and safe for vehicles to travel around. Number 6 is curb height minimum. There's a requirement for 6-inch curbing. The applicant wanted 4-inch, and that was mostly to allow vehicles to overhang landscaping in parking stalls. And lastly, number 7, this development would have required a buffer wall, a 6-foot wall, along the east rear property line because of differences in zoning. And the applicant proposed landscaping instead of a wall, which staff had supported and the commission had approved. So getting into the parking variance specifically, again, the applicant had provided argument in support of this, as for all the requests. Staff had recommended approval of conditions, and the commission had approved them. And the justifications from the applicant via the commission follow on the next slide. Basically, it fall into 3 different categories. Item 1 is that walking is actually realistic in this site. So the second largest grocery store, Safeway, is a little more than a quarter mile away. It's a 5 to 6 minute walk away. So it's reasonable to expect that people would actually do grocery shopping on foot. There's also a very large city park, about 7 to 8 minute walk away. And then there's additional commerce, for example, banks and restaurants in walking distance of this project. Second category is cycling and transit. So there are 2 bus routes and stops in the vicinity of the project. One is a Chariot's route that goes to and from Salem Kaiser. That's Route 20X. And then, of course, there's the local bus route. Second is that the applicant is providing bicycle parking very much above and beyond the minimal requirement in the WDO. Ratio, if I remember offhand, is something like at least 1 bike parking space for every apartment. And this is also supported by the fact there'll be an 8-foot sidewalk, which allows for cyclists who choose to ride on the sidewalk and pedestrians to interact safely and comfortably. And the fact that there'll be a public path from roughly the middle of the project to that sidewalk. And then the last part relates to property management. So when the property is constructed, the applicant has indicated through the narrative that the property manager will regulate household allocation of stalls. In other words, when someone signs a lease, it'll be very clear about how you as a tenant get to have parking. So when you get an apartment, how many parking spaces do you get? Under what conditions? That sort of thing. Another point is typical for apartment complexes, there's always some degree of vacancy at any time because of market conditions. And the applicant forecasts that typically at any time, the average will be 5% vacancy, meaning that 10 to 20 stalls will basically be unclaimed at any given time. And lastly, the applicant offered, and staff has conditioned the project such that we can take them up on the offer if needed, that if there were to be a parking problem, one of the things the city could do is essentially require the property manager to contract with a car sharing service, which some of you might be more familiar with from the larger metro areas. But essentially, it's a service where a vehicle is parked and operated by a company, and you pay for the service of doing very short-term rental. So you could choose to not have your own vehicle, but pay as needed to borrow a vehicle for a short period of time for trips, and then return the vehicle to the project. And I should add, the reason this is useful is my memory is that many studies show that some car sharing services in some markets can basically offset 12 privately owned vehicles. Moving on to the conditions generally for the project. Instead of repeating them verbatim from the staff report, this summarizes what the conditions are getting at and what the commission approved. So the conditions encourage walking and cycling. I had mentioned the wide sidewalk, the Jacobson path, lots of bicycle parking, and allowance for a future extension of that path. The second is we also get things that are ordinarily obtained for a project like this. So there's going to be right-of-way dedication along the highway, and then there's going to be dedication of various easements to allow the city to have public utilities be where they need to be. Another is cross-access drive aisles and easements. And in the context of especially a highway corridor, what cross-access means is that in order to try and minimize driveways over time and consolidate driveways, the way to do that is allow the driveways to be shared by different developments and different owners. And so what this project is doing is having drive aisles go right up to the north and the south property lines, and to grant easements, public easements, that allow people to access the highway and get to the north property and to the south property. The idea being if and when those adjacent properties develop, they would continue those drive aisles and easements. And those developments also minimize driveways in the future. The conditions also require what staff's calling parking demand management, for lack of a better phrase, in order to encourage walking and cycling and bolster the parking variance. It also allows more compact parking, which allows more parking to fit into the site because each stall is slightly smaller. They also allow a lot of landscaping to make up for the fact that there won't be an architectural wall, the buffer wall. And then lastly, they limit the height of exterior light fixtures. In between the time that the Planning Commission meeting occurred and today, staff learned that some of the neighbors were concerned about a city ordinance that had been adopted 20 years ago when the property had gone through a zone change. At that time, there was no specific development proposed. It was simply a change to the zoning map. What the zone change did was it rezoned the property, and I'll add that this was a time before the WDO was adopted. That adoption was in 2002. There was a finding in that ordinance, among several, that essentially said that if and when site development did occur, that the site plan review would address compatibility of the development. And that prediction, you might call it, came to pass because the applicant today proposed through what we call design review that very thing. The applicant proposed a number of applications through which staff applied the criteria in the development ordinance to address a variety of factors, including compatibility, as generally termed. And then this is pretty much the end for now. If there are any immediate questions of staff, I'll be happy to answer them. If you'd like to return to any images, we can do that before we move on to the introduction by the applicant.
I'm curious, can you show me where the cross pathways would be?
You're talking about the drive aisles?
Yeah.
I have to take out some buildings, I think.
Okay, so if you follow the arrow, the north one goes here up to the property line, and then the south one goes here to the south property line.
So in theory, then that would attach to the business or the driveway next to it.
It would go up to the property line, and if and when, say, Owls ever redeveloped, the idea is the city would seek to have a similar arrangement, so the drive aisle would continue. And for example, Owls might consolidate from, I believe, 2 driveways today to 1, and the one might be aligned with James Street.
If I could I just add one, just a little clarification point for the record? And it gets back to the commentary that was received at your last meeting. I just wanted to sort of point out that we wanted to make it sure that everyone understood that the Planning Commission decision was put into the record, but remind the council that the commentary that we received at that last city council hearing had to do with whether or not to call this item up. That didn't constitute specific evidence into the record, but after that meeting, what I did was I let the applicant know that they should go back, review the video of the comments that we received at that meeting, that you received at that meeting from the public, and that's probably what led to the fact that they came in with a revised plan.
So I just had a question. I think I know what the heart of the issue is tonight, but can you speak a little more about the decision to change the parking standards? Because I get this every time we talk about the WDO and giving variances to the WDO. It's like, why have it in the first place? If we're going to say, the standard's 20, but hey, we're going to give you 60% just on that one compact issue. I just struggle with that because I know, having lived in apartment complexes over my lifetime, there's never like a surplus of places to park, and it doesn't grant a lot of livability when there's not a lot of parking and you're telling people, hey, you need to go bike or ride share. Yeah. And I was going to ask real quick, the developer of this property, where are they from? Do we know?
I don't know for sure, so when the developer introduces himself, I'll let him answer that specific question.
Yeah.
Going to the parking specifically, essentially there are general criteria for variance requests, and the applicant made a request and provided justification for that request. Essentially, staff was convinced. It boils down to what's in the slide, that given where the site is in relation to a variety of services, for example, parks, shopping, dining, the fact that there is transit around and that there would be public improvements for cycling and walking, it seemed reasonable to expect that people actually would be more likely to walk and cycle and not drive as often.
But I totally understand that makes perfect sense, but the percentage of people that actually work in Woodburn is flip-flop from most, we're a bedroom community. So, yeah, all the services are close, but most of us don't live, let me flip that around, don't work in Woodburn. We live in Woodburn, and we commute out. So is there, and maybe the applicant can explain that piece of it.
I could add more too in that the condition that addresses this is a very long one. And one of the key provisions it has is it opens a window until July of 2021 so that the city could basically do an observation. So if there is a parking problem, and there may not be, the city basically has leverage to make the property manager do something and gives us the discretion to define what those solutions might be. It gives us a hook, is the way I would describe it. So it may not be a specific ready-made solution, but allows us to come back and revisit the issue if there is a problem.
Have you seen that be successful anywhere?
Well, I can speak to my own personal experience as well, having lived in an apartment complex like this. I lived in one in Tualatin for about 8 years, and I actually looked into it. The average stall count for that was 1.515 per apartment. And in the 8 years I lived there, the one time there was a parking problem was when management decided to resurface the parking lot in phases. And I had to park on the street for 2 nights in 8 years. So I would say, based on that experience as a tenant, and that type of apartment complex is typical in the country, I honestly would not expect that problem from this project or any multifamily apartment complex.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of families at times, they're doubled up, sometimes tripled up. multiple people in the household are probably working and have multiple cars. As a single mother and with the rain and everything, I will not be walking to go grocery shop. I will rather risk not finding a parking spot. But so that's one thing. I work in Portland, so I have to make that drive. There's no way. I mean, even with public transportation, it's really hard, especially if people just aren't aware. And then the shared part or car that you mentioned, I'm thinking about people that don't know the language and how accessible that will be for people and how comfortable they will feel borrowing someone else's car. Another thing is, can you go back to the map? I want to see kind of like all the buildings and how they will look. The new map. Now, with that building C, does it have to be there? Because if parking is an issue,
They were gonna shift the.
they shifted, but
The one shifted.
But does that have to be there at all? Because if that's an issue for other people and for their privacy, and if parking is an issue, I mean, why can't you just make it all maybe parking, or maybe shift the clubhouse over there? So then that way, I'm just kind of thinking ahead of like, if I were to be living there, I wouldn't want someone that close to me in my home.
With that open-ended question, I think it'd be best, since the proposed change came from the applicant, to let the applicant explain where they're coming from.
Perfect.
I would like a refresher on how many, in these apartments, 204 apartments, how many what are the units division, just to remind me of this?
I can turn
As
around
far
for a
as
second.
bedrooms.
It's in the illegible text on that diagram, but I also have it in print behind me. So
Oh,
give me just a
good.
moment, please, and I will turn around and get that count for you.
I see it right now. 1 bedroom, 36, 2 bedrooms, 150, and 3 bedrooms, 18.
So it's not going to be a multifamily unit. Okay.
My concern is, as Ms. Corballis, is I myself own 4 vehicles. Okay? You know, I don't drive them all, but I need a place to park them. And I imagine that as soon as these 2 bedrooms, the kid becomes a teenager, he's gonna want a car, mom and dad have a car. There's no off-street parking in this area. Al's is not gonna want people parking there. The restaurant that's vacant now isn't going to want people parking there. It doesn't make sense to me. It's not adding up very well. Also, looking at this, the play area is so minimal for the number. You know, I don't know why that wasn't addressed. Because the number of units, that play area is about as big as my backyard, and I wouldn't want that many kids. So,
Well, I can add 2 observations that piggyback off that. One is there is an amount of off-street parking across the highway along Alexandra. It is a public street with parking lanes on either side.
wait, how are they gonna cross the street then?
Yeah, there's no, we would, if without, I mean, yeah, no.
I know, it's not, you didn't design, I know, it's not you.
I was going to simply say that, at least under Oregon law, every intersection is a legal crossing, even if it's not marked or necessarily safe. But there is a legal crossing because it is a T intersection of the highway and the street.
Correct.
That would be exciting.
If I could, I thought I was trying to touch base on one of the parking issues. There's a specific condition that staff's included that tries to address what we have found to be one of the issues we have with multifamily parking we have in other parts of the city. What often happens is the spaces that are on site aren't utilized. And the reason behind that is because there's a provision in our WDO, it's been there for a long time, that says that half of your parking spaces on your site have to be in a garage. Okay? So even on a multifamily site, there's a provision that says you have to have, if you're required to have 100 parking spaces, 50 of them must be garages. And what staff has seen, and this has been a code enforcement issue in the past, is that oftentimes these property management companies, when they take over these apartment complexes, say, yep, we have, say, 100 parking spaces, that's enough for everybody that we're supposed to have, but we're going to charge an extra $75 a month for that garage space. And people who live there say, well, I'm not paying an extra $75 a month, which means they're only getting half the parking that they're allowed to use because the garages are either sit empty or worse, because their garages, as we all know, they don't get used for cars, they get filled up with people's junk. So what happens is not only do we have people, not only have a situation in some of our apartment complexes where we require them to put in garages which don't get used for cars, because I'm guessing there's a few people in the room who don't use their garage just for their car. They probably use it for other things. That happens in apartments as well. But then because apartment complexes charge for those, that's another reason that people say, I'm not going to pay that extra money. I'll just go park in the street for free, or I'm allowed to go do it. So staff has put together a condition that essentially says that the property management company here can't charge an additional fee for those, we'll call them carports for now. Because the other thing that staff has done is staff has made an interpretation, and this is in here, and we've made this interpretation previously, that a carport can qualify as a garage for multifamily. And there's a variety of reasons why that's, we think, a good idea and why it's an accurate interpretation of the code. So what this proposal does that's different from other ones where we have had problems in town is A, they can't go out and charge a separate fee for people who want to, for residents who want to use this extra carport, right? If you get X number of spaces, those spaces are going to be available to those people, and they won't be able to say it's an extra $100. And the other is, because it's a carport, they will not be used for storage. They will only be used for parking spaces. And I think that those aren't huge things, but I think they make a difference. I think they open up, make better utilization of a site and the parking on site. Those are things those are just, I guess, in conjunction with the other factors we were talking about. Those are the kind of considerations that staff had and that the Planning Commission felt favorable about in approving that variance application.
And if I may add something to make something crystal clear. So the condition does allow owners to charge parking, but it has to be a uniform amount. So there can't be discrimination among an open air stall or a carport stall or stalls that everyone knows is convenient and the ones in BFE, if I may say that. So property managers can charge for a parking space, but they just can't discriminate among what type of parking space it is. So there's no incentive for people to buck the system.
Mr. Mayor, I have two questions.
Please.
I have two questions. The first, did I understand that the applicant has agreed to pivot Building C?
Well, they provided these materials to staff with the understanding that they would formally submit them and make the case to you for them, yes.
When they do pivot Building C, does that change the parking ratio?
Yes, the applicant made clear in the cover letter that you'll be seeing shortly that the change to the site plan results in a net reduction of 9 stalls.
Of what?
9 stalls.
9 stalls. Okay, thank you very much.
Well, this time if there's any other questions for them, we can move to hearing from proponents. So I will now ask if there's anyone from the audience that would like to provide testimony in favor of the application, to please come up to the microphone.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Point of order, I think we need to ask the applicant first.
I'm sorry. I would now like to welcome the applicant up for its presentation to the commission. Excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council, for having us here tonight. We are, what's the best way for me to advance the slides?
If you have a thumb drive, you can plug in your PowerPoint.
You didn't put it on your,
Oh, I think we can do that.
okay, thanks.
What's your name, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name's Robert Lieb, L-E-E-B, Lieb Architects at 308 Southwest First Avenue, Portland, Oregon, 97204.
And while we're waiting, I just thought, if you don't mind, I was just going to remind anyone in the public, if they want to submit testimony tonight or comment, and even if they don't want to comment, they can just submit written comments on a card, and that gives them legal standing, which is an important legal term. You can just fill out one of the forms that are yellow and it looks sort of orange over there. And if you want to fill those out and bring them up here, we'll collect them. And if you want to speak tonight, we'll call you up in a moment.
In the meantime, I can tell you that the boys soccer team won their semifinal 2-1. So if you want to, the next finals is at Liberty High School in Hillsborough on Saturday at, I think, around noon. I think the boys and the girls will both be playing at Liberty High School.
Wow, that's great. I would like to also say that the developers here, Eugene Lebunsky, who grew up in Woodburn, and we have our traffic consultant here for any questions. We have our landscape architect here, and also one of my associates is here also to answer any questions.
While we are preparing his presentation to come in, I thought I could at least bring this up and maybe you can talk for a few moments. Is that all right? Just about the site plan, walk them through something we may have missed, some clarification about some questions we heard.
Do I have a pointer or a way to?
There won't be I just have to use that.
Okay. Well, one of the things there was a number of issues that we had to deal with on this particular site. Obviously, the cross easements that Colin brought up were, oh, is that it? Okay, well, I think you've seen this overview. Our goal here is to create a first-class apartment project that would be probably at the high end of any of the older apartments in the city. So can I use this as a pointer then?
Let's give it a try. Let's give it 1 second. I apologize for the delay. We'll get us squared away here in a second.
Oh, yeah, okay. I don't know if that's, okay.
It's a PDF.
Oh, that's why it's not clicking.
Sorry, I misunderstood you. It's on this guy. Oh. Thought it was touch sensor.
So I just page up and page down, I guess.
That's the coolest logo.
Okay. Hey, Colin, how do I change the slide on this one? So what do I do? Okay, I have a PD. We have one on thumb drive. Hey, Doug, do you have that thumb drive? Oh, Chris, do you have that thumb drive? So this, oh, it's just a PDF.
They go to playoffs next.
Understand why the cursor is just
So finals are this weekend in Hillsborough.
You know what?
Are they in Hillsborough too?
Just go back.
You can just tell me.
Okay.
It's like fog. Really? Traffic's going like 45 miles an hour.
Dressed in black. One of us.
100%. I almost get kidding. I'm trying to go across there, so. Somebody tried to take me out of Aircastle, just turning right. I'm like, hello? I'm not being blind. How do you miss me? So much suspense. They're being quiet. They're working on it, I promise. I can hear them. Clicking.
We should have some like interlude music. Do we have like guitar music? There we go.
Okay. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thanks for everybody. I appreciate their patience. So what we were tasked to do here is come up with an apartment project that created the density required, created the parking, and dealt with some of the cross easements through the site. If we go to the next slide. You can see the circulation pattern. We were required to create, because of our one driveway, we were required to create a circular drive that goes through the site and accommodates fire trucks. We met with Fire Marshal, which he approved. There's also a second cross easement in the middle of the site, north-south cross easement that was required to be placed in the site, and also a future connection to the neighborhood to the east, which none of these connections may or may not happen, but we were required because of the length of our site to put these cross easements through. So that created some of the restrictions. We also have the easement along the south side that goes the whole entire length of the site. We're required to put in a footpath for half the site, but the easement is there to extend the path to all the way to the east. So again, this was our initial concept. Next slide. The architecture, I think Colin showed. Again, these will be 3-story apartments. Will be done with fairly permanent materials, the hardy planks and shingles and lap siding. Lots of different colors to kind of create demarcation between the bottom of the building and the top. Next slide. Our clubhouse, which will feature exercise room, meeting rooms, kitchen for people to have community gatherings. Next slide. Some of the detail of the clubhouse and the apartments, some of the materials, essentially a material board we plan to use. Next slide. Again, the landscape plan. Our landscape architect is here. He'll be glad to comment on all the landscaping on the site, but it's a very extensive landscaping plan. This is the east side of the site. Next slide. The west side of the site. And this is where we had Building C rotated against the property line. And we did spend, I think, about an hour listening to the council hearing from last week or so and we listened to the comments and felt that there was a good opportunity to try to create relief between Building C and the adjacent property owners. Next slide. Again, the original plan. Next slide. And we rotated Building C. I think we've created a much more generous separation between Building C and the property line. It also gives us the ability to plant much larger trees, and we'll go into that in the next slide. Next slide, Colin. Oh yeah, this is, we do lose 9 spaces. This is where the 9 spaces would come from. That came from when we rotated the building. We lost 1/2 of a bay of parking in that one spot. Next slide. So this slide, I don't know if you can see it well, but I don't know if we can blow that up.
It's usually down at the bottom on a PDF or on the top. There you go.
If you drop the drop-down arrow next to the 4.75, 47.5, you can increase it there. Right there.
I think he's out of aspect.
think we lost our slide, though.
No, I think it's there. It's just
Oh, is it there?
we're focused on the wrong part of it.
Yeah, you just expanded it.
Or not. Adobe does that once in a while.
Oh,
Kind of.
discouraging.
I think it's running out of memory.
Yeah. It's possible to make this one a little bigger. Anyway, this slide is demonstrating the distances. The red line to the right of our property line is kind of a general, generic line tracing the distances, or the face line of the houses that are on the east of the property, our property line. And those are some of the distances that we have there. Obviously, we're rotating still around the one corner, but it allows us, again, to plant many more trees. And so the distances are in the 50, 60, 70, 80, 100-foot range along that line. Next slide. So what we're proposing to plant would be 19 Leland cypress that would grow basically, they grow about 3 feet a year, put them in about 12, 14, 16 feet. So within a few years, we'd be up to the 30, 40, 50-foot range, and it would create a continuous hedge across that back property line, screening all the buildings. And we're also, and you can see the photograph on the lower left there, is kind of conceptual of what it would look like. And we're also, in the interim, would be providing the arborvitae to create an immediate hedge through there. So immediately you'd be getting a 8 to 10 foot height plus the 12 to 14 foot lelands that would go in. And again, they're very fast growing, probably the fastest growing evergreen there is. And that, again, would give us a lot more distance between that building and the property line. So that's what we believe is the best solution for the property at this time. So we have the landscape architect here, traffic consultant, and the owner if you have any specific questions.
Submit hard copies?
We have hard copies.
Okay.
Questions?
Why didn't you build a wall along the back? I don't know if I heard that from anybody. I think that's the main bone of contention, isn't it?
No, I think it was the distance to the site. The wall is an option. We felt that the arborvitae would give a more kind of, instead of just a wall, it would give a more vegetated, solid screen that would give the visual screening, and would be a softer, better way to do it. That was the reason.
Thank you.
So does building C even have to be there? Like how I mentioned
Building C
before?
is part of the performance, part of the allowed density, and it is part of our plan, yes.
So there's no way that you can take it out and
No.
switch things around?
Someone suggested putting our clubhouse there. The clubhouse is going to generate a lot of noise. It seemed to be better up front. It's also kind of the management point of control. It can visually see people coming in and out of the property. That's what the management is. That's how we'll visually see people who come in and out. We found that's the best way to protect these properties.
So this is a process is going to continue, so we'll have more chance to comment and to ask questions. So thank you very much. Sir. Thanks. So I will now ask if there is anyone from the audience that would like to provide testimony in favor of the application besides the applicant. All right, the moment many of you have been waiting for. I will now ask if there's anyone from the audience who would like to provide testimony in opposition of the application. And instead of all you coming forward, I've got the list of people here. We will ask two things. One, we are going to have the timer for 3 minutes so that we all can go to sleep before midnight. And so I've got the list of people that have signed up here. They were So I'm going to just go through in this order. And before we start, I would like to, in the interest of time, if by the time we get to your comment and 7 people people before you have said the same point, I agree with the previous speakers on this point, and then make any new points that are there to help us with that. So first we have Sandra Camacho, 1235 Greenview Drive can be first. And these little lights here will tell you, or it'll probably buzz, does it?
Right there.
Yeah, right here. Yeah. And then once again, please speak closely to the microphone so that...
Okay. I'm a little bit nervous.
It's okay.
My name is Sandra Camacho Otero. I moved here to Woodburn just 11 months ago. I work in Portland, so I commute. I have a car. I'm just going to cut to the chase because I have like 3 pages here, and I know there are some things here that are new, which opens me to the possibility that the applicant is, willing to work with us. But we went and looked through different things in the ordinances and variances for the city of Woodburn. And I'm going to read a little bit very quickly. In one of the variances, it says that the development consistent with the request will not be materially injurious to adjacent properties. And it should be considered visual, noise, traffic, drainage, erosion, and landslide hazards. My initial concern was about the building because I live in that corner after even the modification of that building. I'm in the corner, east corner. My house probably is in that area. So I will have people look into my, backyard, my windows of my bedrooms in the back. I think it's a great idea when they propose of, eliminating that building C and make it into parking, which will take care of the other issue that I have in our neighborhood. It's a very quiet neighborhood. We have kids in the street. There's the park, Nelson Park, and I'm concerned that many people who might rent might have more than 1 car, even 2 or 3 cars, and that overflow without parking there by moving that building, eliminating even more parking, will turn out parking in our streets, which will be very, very inconvenient for trash collection, safety for kids because there will be more car flow in our street than is right now. So I just putting that out there for you to consider when making your decision tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Craig, without butchering your last name. Thank you. So again, please state your name for the record when you come up, your address, and...
My name is Craig Ronshausen, and I live at 1235 Greenview.
Mm-hmm.
So I live with Sandra, and we've been living together for 12 years, and we're finally going to get married. Anyway, so she can still stand me after 12 years. Thank you very much for considering what I'm about to say. When he was showing pictures of how everything looked, he showed a picture to the west and one to the north and one to the south, but he didn't show a picture to our house and behind him, because there's a 34 inches for my house discrepancy in the land to where I am. Our yard, they actually took dirt from the park across the street when they put those houses in there, and our land is 36 inches higher than the land where they are. Putting in arborvitaes there without any retaining wall is pretty much going to make a really good avenue for anybody that wants to hide in the bushes while they're coming into my house without any protection. I'm 64. I'm going to be 65 quick. 15 years from now, I'm going to be 80. And I'm not going to be able to defend myself against people coming through the bushes into my backyard where there's not even a retaining wall. A 10-foot concrete retaining wall and the complete elimination of building C would do a lot to make what this ordinance calls necessary for public peace, health, and safety. And this is the ordinance that I gave you all a copy of. It's the ordinance 2223. And 3 minutes is not enough time for me to go into everything that I want to say. But anybody that thinks that people in Woodburn are going to walk to work is out of their mind. Out of their mind. And if you say, hey, it's legal, even though there's no light or anything for people to cross that, if it's more important for the builder that it's legal than somebody gets killed making that crosswalk, that's another reason that shows exactly what kind of mindset has put this entire thing together. None of the consideration for we the people have been mentioned at all about that. What about remedy for my property? And who's going to be responsible for the monetary compensation of my property when the property values go down every single year? Okay? We do have constitutional rights, God-given rights that are protected by the Holy Canon, Magna Carta, the Declaration of Independence, and the Preamble and the Bill of Rights. Unalienable human rights, not civil rights, not inalienable rights. The Constitution for the United States, the documents created by our founding fathers. And we are entitled to remedy.
Thank you very much, sir.
It's no accident.
Lupita Peña Baltazar. Lupita Peña Baltazar.
Good evening. My name is Lupita Peña Baltazar. I am at 1165 Greenview Drive. I was aware that there was going to be some apartments built in our nearby our neighborhood, but did not know exactly the location until a neighbor informed me to come tonight. And as I'm looking at this presentation, I noticed that it's very close to my home also. And just thinking about the noise complaints that we currently have right now, and then adding more people to our neighborhood is gonna really pick up. So that's one of my concerns. Another concern for me is also just the value of the property too. I just moved in also 11 months ago to that neighborhood, and what I was told is that it's a very quiet neighborhood where my 3-year-old child could grow up, and it's going to be peaceful there. And just thinking about like more people coming into this area, it's a little bit concerning. And just in regards to the parking too, what I heard, it doesn't seem like it's going to be manageable, even though they say that it could be. Let's be realistic, it's not. So that's all I want to say.
Thank you very much. Feel free to clap. Yeah, there's Marlene Hernandez.
Hi, my name is Marlene Hernandez. I live in 1199 Greenview Drive. I live right behind the nursery. And I'm going to speak on my complaints. We've been living in 1199 for 17 years. And we have a big thing with privacy in our family. And in our backyard, we do have very tall trees, so nobody in the nursery, no neighbors could see us. And we do have little children, and our backyard is pretty spacious, and we get to, enjoy without any problems. So having these new apartments that are going to be 3 stories, and then the apartment complex that C is going to be pretty close. It's starting right next to my neighbor's house and right next to the nursery. It's just a bit concerning for privacy, and also in our nursery, there has been a lot of complaints about people going over, jumping, and then there has been one time a report where someone went stealing into the nursery and ran over our backyard and ran away. And it's just also concerning because there could be a lot of misunderstandings of people from other places are going to be going, because it is easy. It is easy to jump over. It's not a big fence. It's pretty small. And for me, I think the biggest is just the nursery and privacy for our family. So.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ulf Björklund.
Council, my name is Ulf Björklund. I live in 1281 Greenview Drive, which is right behind Building C. I'm an audiobook narrator, and so my entire work is dependent on a quiet environment, as quiet as possible. I also have audiobook producers that are very stringent in as far as noise threshold levels are concerned. And some of this I can control myself, obviously, and I do the best I can. Apartment buildings that close would pretty much make it impossible for me to work. My work right now, and our work actually together, is our retirement. We don't have a retirement. That is as it is. But that would put me in a really difficult position. Things changed a little bit. Building C moving back really doesn't change much. I appreciate the gesture, but it still makes a building that is 3 stories high. So apart from the noise, we also have the inside. You can even argue that the inside is even better. From that back up, you can see even more. It's a little further back, but it certainly is not enough. The line of sight. Also, the arbor vitae, as has been mentioned, is simply not tall enough. It's not going to grow that tall. And there's going to be too many holes and places that people can slip through if they need to. The other thing is, as has been suggested, the best solution would be to move Building C, which will do several things. One, it will make it possible for more parking space. The building that has been lost, people now have space. They will also make a great place for a park. We mentioned before that there wasn't enough. This will be an excellent opportunity. In lieu of that, I would suggest a 1-story building that gives you an idea of the line of sight there, which would be very acceptable. And if the builder wanted to, I don't know how that works, you can make that premium apartments. So not only do you have a 1-story, but you also have a park behind you. The kids can play and access to it. I think that will be an excellent solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Felanita Muriov.
Hello, my name's Felanita Moraviev. My husband and I live on 1297 Greenview Drive. My husband and I have lived in this home for the past 6 years. Prior to that, this property was owned by his grandmother, who bought it in 1988. So it's been in the Moraviev family for a very long time. And I was hoping it'd be a safe haven for our future child that is going to be born in a few months.
Congratulations.
But as these apartments are approaching upon us, it makes me more and more concerned every day for the well-being of my child. Sorry, I'm nervous. With these apartments being tall and right in our backyard, I'm concerned people will be able to see my child's nursery or creep through bushes and jump my fence. Like, that's supposed to be a safe place for my child, and with the apartments that close, it doesn't feel that way. And without a wall there, it doesn't feel safe either. With the apartments being reduced to 1 story, I feel like it would definitely reduce the number of units and make it so that there is more parking. I've lived in apartments before, and that is the biggest issue, is finding places to park, especially compact spots. Most people drive trucks out this far in the country and don't live or work in Woodburn. So parking at Al's across the street or off of 99, that's not a safe place for anyone to park. They're gonna wanna park in residential areas. Even that's not very feasible because that's a long walk. If you have a child or if you have groceries, you're not gonna wanna walk through that, you're gonna try to cut through people's yards, or you're gonna find anywhere you can park, even if it's not a place that you're supposed to. And so, I would like the contractor and architect to be good neighbors and hear all our stories here today and realize, you know, there is more to it than the most profit they can get by getting as much units as they can into a small space. Well, it's not small, it's pretty large, but I'm just thinking like they can reduce that, make it so that people can park, they can make it a better community within our new neighbors, because these apartments are going to be our neighbors. I want them to and be able to find a place to park. I want them to enjoy Woodburn. But if they don't want to listen to us and try to make more accommodations, then why do I want to stay in Woodburn where I don't feel like my child will be safe?
Thank you. So Fred? Fred? Oh. Okay.
Hello, my name is Fred Moraviev. I reside on 1297 Greenview Drive. This is my sister, Katie. I just want to start off by saying that all 4 years that I played baseball at Woodburn High School and a few years semi-pro after that, my favorite pitch to hit was a curveball that was thrown at us today. It's very hard to make an argument when you get the facts and you have to make a decision very quickly, of course. So this kind of goes to waste, right? Our main concern really was building C and its height and proximity, but it was definitely more than that. The lack of an architectural wall for sound and for safety reasons was definitely a huge concern. The other part of it is definitely, and I'm getting the vibe from City Council from this, there's a lot that's trying to get squeezed into this property here that it just can't handle it. It's going to bust the seams of the pants, basically. So with the amount of parking spots that are there now, I believe it's at 373 now. I believe I could be off a little bit. It's just off the top of my head here. But since they lost a few, it actually makes it worse here. So the variance that was one of the parking variances that was granted was, as far as I read it, 60% compact parking, which it's usually 20%. And I could be reading that wrong, and I would appreciate if someone could correct me on that. But 60% compact parking would be great for smaller cars, not good for work trucks. Not only that, but even with that variance, they still end up with less than 2 spots per dwelling. Where's the overflow parking going to be? Is it going to be across the 5 lanes onto Alexandria Avenue? I mean, that makes the most sense, right? The other concern that I have, and I worked way too hard on this to just let it go to waste. Thanks, guys, for doing that. I appreciate that. This originally was what it was going to look like in my backyard. You got my greenhouse, my neighbor's fence, and arborvitae right here. We got the apartment, of course. Just I guess with the new trees on there, just replace this whole apartment with those trees, I guess. If they're supposed to grow, what is it, 50 to 60 to 80 feet tall, now we have a wall of trees blocking our western side. I'm not going to have sun. I don't know how tall that is now because I haven't been able to look at my backyard to see what 60 feet is. I'm going to lose a lot of hours of sun. Really quickly show them. Single story for building C and D.
Thank you very much. David Rosales.
Yes, I am Dave Rosales, and I live at 1160 Greenview Drive. My property will be right across the street, but right at the corner of Owls. I think with the 3 stories high, it's probably gonna be tall enough where the top floor will be able to even see our house. It would be our front yard, but our neighbors across the street, I mean, they're our neighbors. And, I've got to speak up in behalf of them because they are losing privacy. If they ever do make an easement way, there are going to be a lot of people coming over to the park that's 2 doors from me. That's fine. But we have a lot of traffic right now, as it is. We like the privacy. It's a nice, quiet area. If there is access at a later time where they can come across, that's going to be where they're going to be parking. And they'll just be using that easeway. They have a community little center that they're going to have. They're going to celebrate. People are going to have to park somewhere. I mean, usually we tell each other when we're going to have a celebration. And, hey, take my spot. That's no problem. It's only for an evening. This is going to be a every weekend thing. I really just don't see it. I feel that C should be completely out. And the property is big enough, they're still going to make plenty of money if they go to a single floor. That's what I got to say about that.
Thank you, sir.
Uh-huh.
Ricardo Vasquez Rodriguez.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. My name is Ricardo Vasquez Rodriguez. I'm on 1189 Greenview Drive. Well, one of my biggest concerns, I'm right there on Building D. I mean, the corner of that Building D is going to be, with 3 stories high, it's going to be right in my backyard. And again, one of the biggest problems I think is going to be there's not going to be safety. I mean, as it is right now, there's a lot of it's been times where people has actually crossed my property because they're running from I don't know God knows who. I have to put security cameras, and I actually unfortunately my dogs died, but I had 2 really big dogs because that was my only way to protect my house. At night, because there was also people just crossing back and forth, and you can ask my neighbors right there, they were talking about, I mean, all the time, people just crossing just from the 99E, crossing directly and going into the park, and just keep going. My other concern that I have, again, is parking. I mean, seriously, whoever designed this plan is really poor. Because there's no parking spaces. Where everybody's going to go? I mean, they're not going to go across the street. They're not. The other part is they're going to park on our street because that's the safest. As it is right now, like my neighbors were saying, I mean, we don't have a lot of spaces. I mean, we all live here in Woodburn. We know that we don't have 1 car or 2 cars. Most of us, we have 3, 4 cars. Where are they going to park? That is the biggest concern. Another one is absolutely, let me see here, work. You mentioned that people are gonna, promote walking and bicycles. Come on, that's not gonna happen. Especially during the, we're in Oregon. I mean, it rains all the time. You think that a mother with the kids are going to be walking to the store? No, they're not. They have to drive. So that's ridiculous, I think. God, let me see here. I have so many things. The biggest thing, my property. I moved to my house 14 years ago thinking that it's going to be an investment. Bringing those apartments, my property is going to devaluate. And I can guarantee you, if any of you live around there, you will probably be sitting over here also just testifying saying, you know what, that's not probably a good idea because my house, we've been working on it, trying to have a better life and maybe look for a retirement. That's going to be part of our retirement. Now, it's not going to go as the market is because, let's face it, having apartments right next to it is going to devaluate the property. So that's something that we should think about it, all of us. And then I think that there's got to be, if they're going to move, you should move C and also move D up because there's no space, there's no time, and we need to put a wall there.
Thank you, Ricardo. So Alex Muravyov.
Good evening, Council. My name is Alex Muravyov. I'm owner of the property at 1297 Greenview. Can I ask, if you guys move C, how far will that far northern end will be away from the property line of the neighbor?
It's 120 feet.
Oh, that's no 120 feet. Come on.
We should have the people speak into the microphone for the recording,
Yeah.
so we can have the applicant come up and respond.
Okay, I asked the gentleman, whether the architect, how far, if they do move building C away from the properties on Greenview, how far will that corner be? He said 120 feet.
It's on a drawing.
So just as a point of order, the applicant will have a chance for rebuttal following the public comment, so they can write down that question and answer that question when they come.
The reason why I'm saying is, it's approximately 35 feet to there. And that picture looks like it's gonna be about 30, 40 feet. And even if it's 40 feet, that's still token effort. Now, all of you turn around and look at that wall. Could you imagine us coming home every night and there's a wall twice as high as that, 3 or 4 times wider? That's what they want to do to our property. And besides that, there's gonna be balconies. And besides the balconies, there's gonna be a bunch of windows. There goes our privacy. All we need is one teenager to play her hip hop because she's mad at her neighbor because he likes his mariachi music. Okay, it's gonna be to a point, we can't go in the backyard. All our windows gotta be closed. All our doors have to be locked and closed. We're locked in our own properties. If I get tired of living like that, how many of you will be willing to offer me a bid on my house? That's what we're facing, Council.
Thank you, sir. Ida Allen.
My name is Ida Allen. I live at 1258 Greenview Drive. I'm not a public speaker, so please bear with me. I jotted down what I wanted to say, so I'll remember what I want to talk about. City Council members, thank you so much for this opportunity to express my concern about my neighborhood. I'm a resident of Woodburn who resides on Greenview Drive. We lived in this area since 1972, and in our home on Greenview for 24 of those years. I'm not versed in the legalities of city planning, and I don't understand a lot of the language of the statute being presented by my knowledgeable neighbors. But there are some things that I do know and understand. I know that Greenview is an older, well-established neighborhood. I know that we are a family neighborhood, including parents, children, grandparents, and grandchildren. In fact, we have a nice city park just behind our home. We hear the delightful sounds of children playing and see families gathering in that park often. We really like and love it. Our neighborhood, it has been relatively peaceful and tranquil and a great place to live. That's why it felt like a kick in the stomach when I was told that a monstrous 3-story complex was going to be built abutting the property across the street of our neighbors. When I learned it would be 3 stories high with 200 apartments and potentially thousands of people, I felt and still feel deeply worried and concerned for my peaceful neighborhood and those who live in it. So many questions roll through my mind. Will we lose our quality of life? How will we ever handle the load of traffic and cars and loudness? How about the noise in general that will certainly happen? What about the safety of our children who play at Nelson Park? What's going to control the safety of we older retirees who live there. With more people coming comes more crime. Maybe not at first, but certainly it will come, and we all know it. I don't know the answers. I just feel like me, my husband, my neighbors, families are standing in front of a speeding train bracing for impact. When you make your decision tonight, please consider our neighborhood, our tranquility and quality of life when you cast your votes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And our last is Myrtle Stutzman.
I'm Myrtle Stutzman. I live on Broadacres Road in Hubbard. And you might ask, what am I doing here? And I wrote a note on the card. I thought perhaps I would not speak, but you called me, and I will. We own the property at 1323 Greenview, and we rent it to not just renters, but friends of ours. And my primary concern is the right to privacy. And after listening to the presentation, the large trees might address most of that. And then further, after listening to the parking, that's a concern that I echo as well. I think it's probably a short-sighted evaluation for the Woodburn community. But I appreciate your willingness to listen, and I'll say, as my wife's uncle once said, I may be wrong, but I'm not far from it.
Thank you. Right, so I will now ask, oh, sure.
Yeah, I believe I submitted a
Yes.
Kim Bjorklund.
Yeah, please come, sir.
I did hold my husband's sign
Right.
earlier, but
I skipped over you.
Yeah, it's
My-
all right.
My mistake.
Kim Bjorklund. I live with my husband Ulf Bjorklund at 1281 Greenview Drive. The pivoting of Building C is inadequate. Building C and Building D should be eliminated from the plan. At the very least, they should be made one-level buildings with a solid retaining wall 10 feet high for the protection of the community. Eliminating these buildings from the plan would not only help ensure the safety, the peace, the investment, and the quality of life of the people on Greenview Drive, it would also go a long way to solving the parking issues, having a better play area. If this is built as it is, it will devalue our property. It will make it extremely difficult for us to sell. In effect, we'll be trapped in a situation we don't want and we can't leave. City Ordinance 3322, Finding 12, numbers 1 through 4, was written at the time by both the City Council and the Planning Commission to address the issue of shadowing, building height, and privacy. It was written for this exact situation with this exact property. The City Council has the ability to consider the hardship the plan creates for our homes, our home investment, our privacy, and our quality of life. My husband and I have lived here for 10 years. We have a significant investment in our house. We have no retirement. We have the work that we do as narrators. For audio files, for my full-time job is with Providence Health and Services. I work for them editing audio for patient records. I also narrate medical and science videos. My husband is an audiobook narrator. All of this work requires a level of quiet, at least a reasonable level of quiet. Our living will be endangered by this plan. We're asking only for the consideration of changes or removal of those two buildings, not the rest of the property, not the rest of the project. removal or limit to one story with a solid architectural wall. The arborvitae, for a softer view and a more pleasant view for the tenants, can be planted in front of the architectural wall. A better solution would be to eliminate those two buildings from the plan altogether, put in landscaping and a play area, or just the landscaping, and have a real barrier to protect the community that we live in. I'd very much like to thank the council for the chance to speak and for hanging with us all for all this time.
Thank you very much. So we'll say this again, but at the end of that testimony, I want to thank everyone for your thoughtful and passionate testimony. The next ask is if the applicant would like to come back for any rebuttals and answers any questions.
Yeah, I can just basically speak to one of the questions about the distances. The distance from building C to the is between 120 and 150 feet from those. So it averages 120, 130, 150 from the buildings on the northeast corner. The closest other one I think is 50 feet, 70 feet, and I can't read it, but it's about 80 feet. So those are the additional distances that we've moved the buildings. So it's not, so again, what we heard it from the city council, and the night from a few weeks ago was that there was a question of people from the apartments looking down onto the apartments, to the houses to the east. What we feel we've done by moving the building significantly away from the property line, much more than the required zoning requires. It allows us two things. One, it creates more distance, but also allows us to plant significant trees that will create a barrier so people from our buildings won't be able to look down on the people in the houses, and the people from the houses won't see the apartments. So that was the idea and why we did it. We think that was a very straightforward way to take care of that. As far as the wall on the back side and the grade differential, the option to put in the arborvitae we felt would be a softer, not just for the tenants to look at, but in fact for the people in the houses to look at. One of the lots, in fact, in the back, can't remember which lot it is, one of the houses has a arborvitae hedge there already across its whole back line. So we thought that would pick up on that theme. But if the council thinks that a wall is more appropriate, we would be willing to put in a solid block wall.
How big?
How tall?
The code requirement is 6 feet.
I would think in the 6 to 8 foot range, we would be willing to put that in.
Okay, at this time, before the record is closed, do any councilors have final questions for the applicant or the staff? And remembering that we'll deliberate after that, but this is a time just for questions.
And again, we have our traffic consultant here if someone wants to ask about parking ratios.
Okay, questions?
I do have a question of the staff. Who is the previous owner of this property?
Call it down. My name is Eugene Labunsky, 25030 Southwest Parkview Avenue, Wilsonville, Oregon, West Coast Real Estate Holdings. I'm the developer. Also grew up in Woodburn from 1988 to about 2002, went to Woodburn High School. We took great pride in building this project in Woodburn and knowing that bringing a higher quality product, there's a lack of that in the city. In regards to addressing the parking situation, if you have a one-bedroom apartment unit, you can only have one car when you rent and you sign your lease. If you have multiple cars, that car will be towed. the car has to be registered, and that gets checked thoroughly. We're very particular about that. If you have a 2-bedroom unit, you're allowed 2 cars. Usually in complexes of this size, you'll have 5% to 8% vacancy, which allows for a lot more parking. We take our parking very strictly. Management makes sure that each car is identified with a number and has a parking permit. If you have an event, you also have to have a permit, and you have to say how many cars are coming to that event. So we took that into consideration. Most suburbs allow 1-to-1 ratio for parking. I know Woodburn has a smaller population, so this is almost 2 per door, per se. So we feel like the parking is adequate. I know it's a concern. I appreciate all the comments. I would probably be doing the same. I understand that the people enjoyed the freedom of having that field. However, we feel like it's a big economic development for the city. The SDC fees alone, which are system development charges for parks and go directly to City of Woodburn, around $2.5 million that go back into the community. We feel like this project, we took a lot of thought. We also took into consideration the concerns at the original meeting and went into action and moved that building. We're investing a substantial amount of money into landscaping. We're open to a wall if that's what the neighbors want. We want to be a good neighbor. We want to accommodate. We manage our properties professionally. We own around 1,500 units around, starting from Salem to the Portland area. A lot of units here in Woodburn as well, and we take pride. We just recently renovated another complex on James Street. Perhaps it's called Willamette Point Apartments now, just to give you a sense of our work. So that's what we do. And I thank all the citizens for their comments, and I thank the council for considering the project. Thank you.
If I may, I'd like to answer Councilor Carney's question, which is about the previous ownership. So my memory is that the property was owned by Salem Health. Salem Health had intended to build their clinic here, but they chose to sell this property and build the clinic that I think most people are familiar with now. It's under construction at Woodburn Station.
So is it fair to say then that if Mr. Lubunsky had not purchased the property and Salem Health had continued to hold on to the property, we may be sitting here tonight discussing the possibility of having the neighbors on Greenwood looking up at a wall that was the side of a hospital?
I can only say that that is a possibility, yes.
And that wall may look fairly similar to the wall that's now existing out on the other side of I-5 where Salem Health has decided to build their clinic.
I'm actually not familiar with the wall you're describing.
The one on 214, right? That's the one you're talking
The
about?
red wall?
So what I'm saying is that there was already a plan in place to occupy this property with a building or buildings that that would have been roughly similar to what we're all familiar with as a clinic or a hospital. So I'm merely making the comment, and the reason I asked who owned the property before was just to be assured that I was correct. It was Salem Health.
Okay, other questions for the applicant?
I got a question.
Please.
So I'm sure you heard during the rebuttal, there was talk of decreasing the level from a triple to a single level. Is that something you guys are open to? Have you guys thought about that? Is that, 'cause I'm sure everybody in the audience is thinking the same thing. It's like, hey, it's great for a wall, but.
We feel like, me personally, the other buildings are the same 3-story height. Nothing will really change. I think moving the building like we did there brings the most benefit to the request that was asked of the neighbors. I think planting landscaping grows lush. Personally, I put some cedar trees in my backyard for privacy. Within 3 years, they're about 40 feet tall if you irrigate them properly. We professionally maintain all our landscape and install drip irrigation to the trees so they're maintained and grow like they're supposed to.
So you're saying that that's not something we should talk about once you're done talking? Because I'm sure that's probably going to come up, because I wrote it down when they were testifying. If that's something you're open to or not, I'd just like
Not
to
an
know.
option at this time.
Okay.
No.
Thank you.
So how tall is 3 stories?
Basically, each floor is 10 feet, so it's 30 feet plus the roof.
So you're only
About
willing.
35 feet.
So you're only willing to make a wall up to 6 feet,
No, we'd make it 8 feet.
8 feet.
Yeah.
So.
But again, we've got these fast-growing Leland cypress, not, the arborvitae will become
But
irrelevant.
I mean, at this point, I don't think that would be something that, I mean, I personally wouldn't consider an option just because of the erosion and everything. But I'm just trying to picture, because I have the wall, I live on, my backyard would have been 214, so I have that wall. And it's do we know how big that wall is?
You're referring to the 214 sound wall that was constructed as part of the interchange project?
That's like a 30-foot wall.
Yeah.
That's a
So-
big wall.
It's significant. Yeah, I don't recall. That's a
So-
sound wall that was designed for.
So I mean, I personally love it. I think it's great. It blocks out the sound, and I think that's better if the community I personally think that would be better than having a 8-foot wall compared to a 3-story building.
Well, we'd have these two parts. We'd have the 8-foot wall to counter people saying that people would walk through. You can't walk through an 8-foot wall. The other thing is that it would also, if there's a grade issue, that would be part of the retaining wall. That was another comment. So the height, to have a 30-foot concrete wall, doesn't make sense to us in terms of how it's going to look for the neighbors versus a living tree that's green all year round.
Yeah, but I think that I'm thinking if I were to be living there, if that was my backyard, I mean, my concern would be the neighbors watching, the noise, all of that stuff, because compared to where the houses are and how the angle is, I mean, which is another consideration as to like the 1-story building, changing that. So my question to you is, why aren't you willing to change that?
I'm sorry, to change,
Why aren't you willing to make it go from a 3-story to a 1-story?
have to have the owner.
Well, building D and building B would still be 3 stories, so all the apartments, you're still doing the same, you're not achieving anything.
But I'm talking about C, and because that's the biggest concern for most of the community members here.
And we took that concern into consideration and made an amendment, moving the building over, allowing 121 feet at its highest peak, then 79. And then where the corner 10 feet abuts, that's kind of where the corner property comes in, so it's not as
So the
effective.
only reason why you don't want to is because it won't make sense as to why all of the other ones aren't going to be, or the other ones are going to be three stories and not that one?
Well, if it's a concern that people are going to be looking into the backyard, those other apartments will be doing the same thing.
No. Not directly, because they won't be right there in the property line.
Mr. Lubansky, how many units would you lose by making it from 3 to 1?
3 to 1 or 3 to 2?
3 to 1.
You would be losing 12 units.
Okay.
Well, I think that's I'm sorry. That would be, I apologize.
Everything's a story problem. It's okay.
Yeah,
Be
that's what
16,
it is. That's what it comes
16
down to.
units.
How many?
16.
16. Okay. And Mr. Lubansky, have you developed a project of this size before?
Yes, many. We just completed a 266-unit apartment project on the water in Portland.
And
Okay.
how successful you completed them?
How successful?
Yeah.
We own 1,600 plus apartment doors of projects that we've done, and they're occupied. So many,
Okay.
many projects.
But anywhere like, sorry.
Go ahead.
So anywhere like this, in this area, like Woodburn, have you, any other cities, have you made apartment complexes like this big anywhere else?
Yes, many in Salem, Wilsonville, Portland
To this
area.
big of a size?
Correct, and larger. Yeah. In fact, in most cities, this would accommodate more apartments because the parking ratio is scaled down, and most cities are moving to mass transit. I understand this is Woodburn, so that's not the case here, but I'm just saying that typically a site like this would accommodate maybe 270 units plus.
So you honestly feel that if you started this project, you'd be able to finish it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Other questions for the applicant?
If I may, Mr. Mayor, I just
Sure.
thought I wanted to sort of
just as a follow-up to some of the comments received and some of the rebuttal. I want to make sure everyone, and particularly the council and the public, understands the parameters of the review that we have. This is a land use approval. We have to follow all of the state requirements for quasi-judicial hearings. And how we make decisions is those are specified, they're specific under our code. The review of the council, as it was with the planning commission, is limited to subjective criteria that we have. The vast majority of the issues and items that we review it under are objective criteria, such as the building height. This project in particular meets the building height requirements under the code. I think you can go actually as high as 70 feet on this property. The setbacks that are proposed meet, and obviously with the new plan, exceed the minimum requirements for the setbacks for that particular property. In fact, you could be much closer. You could be up to 5 feet to that property line. And remember, this property is zoned commercial, so it could be a bar, a restaurant, a self-storage facility, many other commercial uses, which are pretty intense.
Is this a commercial use?
This is a multifamily use. Multifamily uses in our CG district are allowable permitted uses here. So essentially, you can't deny the use itself. I want to make sure we're setting the parameters here.
So-
Objections about multifamily.
Chris,
multifamily is a permitted use here.
Are you saying because of that, this ordinance developed in 1999, 2233, that specific use of property, consider the height near residential use with respect to privacy, shadows, and an appropriate solid wall or fence? This just physical impact that the development will have on variants such as visual, noise, traffic, drainage, erosion, landslide hazard, all this is in ordinance too, and it's like we're not respecting the people that we're meant to respect or going along with this ordinance.
No, it's not me or us, it's the code, right? They're going through our process to look at that. So our code establishes exactly how high a building can be. It establishes what the setback, the building envelope must be. And that's why, again, I'm talking about objective criteria. There are subjective criteria that are here, which are specifically the variances. And I know that's a big point that we've been talking about, which gets to the parking and the architectural wall, which ties right back to the ordinance that you're referring to. I just want to make sure everyone's clear about exactly what's appropriate and what kind of rights property owners have in the state of Oregon to build according to our codes. And there are specific provisions here which are subjective, and those are specifically, in this case, the variances we're talking about. I just want to make sure I'm laying that out for everybody.
And a point of clarification, so the north and side property line, minimum setback could be 0 or 5 feet, but the east rear is a minimum of 10, with allowances for projections to come as close as 6 feet to the east property line.
Thank you for that detailed clarification.
So, Chris, could you do me a favor and put the variance slide back up, since that's what we're actually supposed to be looking at?
Would this be the list of variances?
Yes, please.
You have the best voice for this kind of thing.
Can I add one more comment? The previous people that looked at purchasing this property were going to do a 4-story
Thank you.
Self-storage building. And I talked to them when I looked at purchasing this. That would have been about 45 feet tall, would have been right up against the property line. And I feel like a self-storage would be much more invasive than apartments.
I mean, I don't agree, but.
Oh, is this a mock-up of that?
No, this is from what we call the pre-application conference. This is from a developer that almost bought and developed the property for mini storage. And this was the draft plan they had at the time. Anyway, I'll go back to the variance slide now.
Okay, and just a point of clarification for staff. This is under the land use criteria. This is what we should be looking at. This is where basically our subjective voice can be heard.
For these variances, yes. The criteria are most discretionary for these.
Or for the overall process? But we're just focusing on this? Am I understanding that?
The short answer is your decision to make. I would point out that there are very few conditions for the design review component of this package of 3 application types, and those are straightforward. I don't remember what they are because it's pretty straightforward. It's like, doesn't meet the standard, but you can tweak the plan to meet the standard. We're done. Moving on. Simple condition. The variances are more, do you buy the applicant's qualitative discretionary argument for a variance? And if not, what is, as a council, your own discretionary qualitative argument in response?
Thank you.
Other questions for the applicant?
How soon do you think about building this?
If we get approval, it would probably start in February or so, January, February.
And did I hear you right that you're content that you're going to pay $2.5 million in SDCs?
That is correct.
That's a lot.
It is, that's the city fees, and it goes directly to the use for parks and recreation in the city. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay. I'm going to close the hearing record for deliberation. This time we'll deliberate on the application. Applying has been mentioned. Our only focus is the code criteria to the application and making determinations on whether the criteria has or has not been met. And just for reference, as we're deliberating, you can see there are 4 options before us. So maybe take a moment to read those, and then we'll deliberate.
I have another question for staff, or can we still ask staff a question? More about process, actually.
You can.
Does the change in the orientation of the building require this to go back to the planning commission, or what impact on our deliberations does the applicant's proposed adjustment building C have?
Well, the change is relatively minor compared to the overall project, and it would continue to meet the standards for the minimum setback from the east rear. Building height doesn't change in the applicant's proposal. So there's not much to do other than acknowledge receipt of the applicant's revised plan, if that's where the council would go.
And acknowledge that they'd be losing another 9 parking spaces.
Yeah, and in this scenario, it'd work its way to a motion to approve, pretty much as the planning commission approved, except that we'd accept the applicant's proposed revisions.
Okay.
And what results from them.
Mr. Mayor, Counselor?
Please.
I agree with that. The other thing to keep in mind here too is that this is an application subject to the 120-day rule. It needs to be decided by January, so you have de novo jurisdiction over this. You've had the hearing, so essentially you've taken the place of the Planning Commission. And I do agree that this is something that the applicant came forward with, and it's just a difference in the plan. So, I mean, you wouldn't want to send it back to the Planning Commission. You have jurisdiction to decide it the way that the applicant is saying that they will do it.
So if we asked to put that wall in, they would have to go back and put that in the...
So if there's going to be a wall, okay, here's what I would recommend is the cleanest, easiest to understand approach is essentially you would accept the variance, but have what I would call a soft denial, in that you then turn around and condition it to require a wall of a specified height that is at least the minimum height required by the code, but also because there's a maximum height for fences and walls in the city,
Yeah, there is.
to not exceed the maximum, which would be 9 feet.
How much?
9.
Oh, okay.
9.
Yes, for commercial zoning and for walls and fences away from streets, the maximum height is 9 feet.
9 feet.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I guess my perspective on that would be deny the application if you went that route, deny the application for the variance. The variances are as they sound. I mean, you have to have findings that vary our code. So the strongest legal position is deny that variance and require the wall. The code would require the wall, absent the variance.
As part of our discussion, can we discuss how we feel about whether or not we want to support that?
Yeah, I think we can, because quite frankly, I believe that the softer, large landscaping is a better option than a 6 or 9 foot wall. I live in a neighborhood that we have walls that got tagged so badly, we planted arborvitae in front of them. To discourage tagging, but also to give a softer view. And while I don't have arborvitae, I planted laurel, which did grow to 30 feet within a couple of years. And now I can't hear or see my neighbors for the exact same reason that the folks in the audience have expressed concern.
So
I support the view that Councilor Ellsworth has just exposed.
So quick point of order. We've gone through this process has to follow these laws, and so thanks for your previous public testimony. And we are at a moment where we're going to be making this decision. So if I can stop and remind us that like civil public discourse this is what America's about. But it's about being civil, and we're going to apply our best thinking to this case.
So the one question, Mr. Mayor, I have for Bob, is there anything we shouldn't be doing in this discussion phase? Because that's what it feels like, we don't do this a lot as a city council. Planning Commission, I'm sure, is regularly reviewing and doing these kind of discussions. And I feel like, we kind of talked about a little bit what Councilor Ellsworth said about the variances. Is there anything that's out of scope? I guess that's basically anything outside the variances that we shouldn't really be, like we start looking where the buildings and stuff are at. Should we be worrying about the lot coverage? Because it's big chunks of space over a certain percentage is required with the code, right? But we don't need to worry about that because it's not an issue, right? Anybody?
If I take that as an example, there is no maximum lot coverage in commercial zones, so there's no standard to speak of.
Man, I'm glad I'm not.
Yeah. So a reminder, just in the process of this, the Land Use Planning Committee went over this. They heard the same presentation from the developer. Our Land Use Planning Commission voted to approve the project with those variances. It's rare for the city council to call up and review a land use planning commission decision, but there were enough concerns about this that we called it up and basically had like a second round. Like we're not the Supreme Court, but we're the next level of court to review that. And then the final reminder is like as Councilor Elza said, we are bound by state law about the conditions, and our only role would be to question the variances and then to review one of these decisions to approve with variances, or deny the applications. So deliberation about those options.
Okay, I have a comment.
Please. We'll call it a deliberation.
So many of our neighbors here have asked for a wall. It's not up to us to say, I don't like the wall, I wouldn't want it in my backyard. It's not where, if they tag it, that will be up to the apartment people to figure out how to fix it, Somebody's not gonna go in their backyard and tag their wall. So, and this is what they've asked us for. This is they're doing so much compromise. And if that's the least we can do, an 8-foot wall, I'm not sure the height that they would prefer, but however high your wall is, you're putting shade in your backyard, so you have to consider that. But aesthetically, if the wall is pleasing, we might want to make sure that the material they use is appropriate as well, and not just make it put up a wall and you end up with.
So that is within the scope of the city council, and keep me on track. City
Mr.
Attorney.
Mayor, yes, if I didn't want to interrupt, but I did get a question from Councilor Morris, and if I could try to answer that and answer you also. I think you are staying on track in terms of, I do agree with what the planning director said about criteria in the ordinance. There's a specified height for a wall. That's in your code. The ordinance that was passed some 19 years ago has limited application, but essentially it reiterates what's in your code. I mean, heights in your code. You've got a variance for parking minimum, that's in your code. You got a variance for the wall, that's in your code. And as was said earlier, variance is the burden of proof for every factor of the variance in your code is on the applicant. So essentially, you do have before you in this case 7 variances, one for parking minimum, and most notably in one for the wall. So as I said before, I mean, those are policy questions, and I'm not saying that, you know, it's certainly entirely up to the council. But those are big questions about the wall and about whether you want to vary the parking. And if you don't want to do that, then findings could be made. I mean, that you don't agree that the applicant has borne the burden of justifying the variance. So that's really, I think, what the case is about. You can't have a 30-foot wall like you do for a sound wall. I mean, that's not an option. It's not in your code. I mean, you got a specified height for a wall. So I can't just choose that, or you already chose that when you passed the WDO. But the variances certainly are something that are entirely within your discretion.
So if I'm going to just summarize, and so tell me if I can ask that question, but when it's within our parameters to pass this motion and it ask for an additional, or like not a variance on the wall, and if I heard the applicants correctly, they're willing to build a wall and keep the arborvitae at the same time. So that would be a.
I prefer the cypress. They'll get
But I'm
bigger.
not sure.
They'll get bigger faster. I don't like arborvitae. Seriously.
So I just made a comment with my summary of the applicants. What I heard them say, is it possible for them to confirm? Or am I out of order?
Well, I think that the public hearing's been closed. What I did hear them say is that they would build the wall. And as I said, the cleanest way to do that, if you wanted the wall built, which you're entitled to under the code, is you deny the variance for the other barrier, and you go with the wall, which is in the code. You agree with that, Chris?
Yeah.
That is accurate. And again, just to point out the fact again, the wall is the actual requirement in the code today. It's called an architectural wall. So we do have architectural standards for what that wall looks like in terms of the sort of texture of it. Has to be 2 tones. There's a requirement for a certain kind of cap on top. We also have height requirements. If the council were to go in that direction, the current plans do not show a wall, and I'd be curious as to where along that boundary it would be, because I'm hearing you might want to have vegetation on one side or the other. I would need that sort of specificity so that we can put that as a condition that we would come back to you with, if you were so inclined.
Okay. So I'm going to just summarize. So specificity would be a wall along the neighbors' backyards on Greenview with the vegetation in front of the wall facing the apartments. I'm seeing nods. Okay. I think we can do nods.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes,
The one
Councilor
thing
Morris.
that I picked up on in the testimony is Greenview curves, and then there's some houses that, are they necessarily on Greenview, but they wrap around underneath the property. I'm not sure if
That's true.
Just to be, I guess, specific, that's what I was picking up in the testimony, it kind of comes down and curves around. So maybe anything that's adjacent to, what's a fancy word
property
for
line.
single-family dwellings or that kind of thing? Sorry.
Chris,
Greenview Drive, yes.
Does it wrap around? I was having a hard time seeing the map.
Yeah, it
So
wraps
where,
around.
where would the
I'll show the
proposed
map again.
fence be? Yeah, could you show us, Colin?
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to get a visual. Okay.
Because isn't there a wider shot? Because it's not just, the people that testified today weren't just these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 houses, I don't think. They were like down. Jesus.
So maybe around the corner to 217, is that what you mean?
Yeah,
Is that what you mean?
1, 2,
And then 1, 3.
1217.
Is it, what's 19, it says 199, 189. Am I reading
Yeah,
that
but
right?
that's Al's Garden.
Right,
So
so
we
we
would only go
Down
up to
here?
1, 2, 1, 7,
Yeah.
and then
These
1,
houses
3,
down
2,
here?
2, 3.
So Colin,
Yeah,
where,
okay, all right.
if the variance is denied for
Forget what I said.
where would the fence actually be constructed? Is it on this map?
I'm sorry, I was distracted at once. Do you mind repeating your question?
Yeah. On this particular graphic, if the variance for the was denied and the fence was required, where would the fence exist on this map? Would it go? Could you go with the mouse? Maybe show us where it would go.
If the variance was denied, there couldn't be a fence. The buffer would have to be a wall.
I'm
Masonry.
sorry. Well, I'm sorry. A wall.
So-
It's only like 10:30, and but
Right.
But just show us
Where's the wall?
where the wall would go.
Yes. So
Would it be the yellow line, question mark?
On the back.
Yes, along the eastern property line.
Okay, so it would be to the south along the Owl's property line as well?
No.
And then it would be to the east? And what
Can you,
about,
with the mouse, can you show us?
Yeah. Thank you.
show us the path?
Right here,
Yep.
Okay.
all the way up to that point.
Yep.
Okay.
The entire eastern property line.
Okay.
Okay, all right.
Mr. Mayor, I'm in possession of a letter that I got here today, November 12th, 2019, from the architects, which outlines all of the variances and the changes that they wish to make to the property. And that's this letter, which I think, Planner Cortez, you had indicated was the summary of what was
Yes.
presented tonight.
Yes, the applicant had given staff copies along with you.
So am I to assume that were we to approve the plans with the variances, that it would include all the things that is in this letter?
That's correct.
And were we to approve the plans with the variance, it would not include a wall?
That is also correct.
Okay. And I don't have a sense that there's uniformity on the council that a wall is a requirement. So I'd have to ask Bob, is it permitted for us to take some sort of a straw, some sort of a sense as to what would we support a wall or wouldn't we?
You could certainly discuss that. I mean, somebody could make a motion if you want to formally do that, or you could just say what you think. I mean, you're in a public session, so I mean, you could certainly deliberate and/or make a motion.
So as part of the
directing
deliberation, if I'm summarizing from this side, and the nods from the developer and the concerns from the neighbors, that a wall along the yellow line would be in addition to the foliage that you put, would be acceptable, and something that we could do by outlined here, denying the variance. I mean, that's the one thing that this council can say, like we'll take this variance, but we're gonna deny the other one.
Well, there's also the
So
issue-
let's do like a quick straw, like is that,
Just to qualify it?
Please.
This isn't the only issue I have with this.
Okay.
Just, I mean, the
Yeah,
walls,
me
that's,
too.
that's one,
Mhm.
but there's.
So let's
another.
go through that issue in this deliberation, and would be in favor of denying the variance and asking them to create a wall along with the foliage.
Yeah, I think that they've committed to that, and I think, yeah, that'd be good.
You're saying, yes, you want the wall.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I prefer a softer approach. I like the trees and the arborvitae. Trees, I think, is good for nature, and with the extra help of the arborvitae, I think that would create kind of a buffer
In the spirit
there.
of deliberation, a clarifying question,
So-
would you be in favor of trees and a wall? Which is what I'm hearing proposed. A wall for safety and the trees.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
Perhaps it'd be easier to ask a two-part question. One is, do you as a council want to deny the variance, yes or no? If yes, then do you accept the applicant's specific proposals for landscaping, yes or no? And if no, what different?
Well, we're just going around asking
Okay.
about the wall.
Yeah, so right now, I just wanted to get through that piece of deliberation that Councilor Carney called up, like, do we have kind of consensus? I'm hearing consensus, we would,
We haven't taken an official vote.
take the
but-
votes, but that's piece one. Okay.
Well, I don't consent to it if we have to deny the application, because I don't think the application should be denied.
So clarification for city attorney. We can accept the application and deny
that variance.
that variance. Or, I mean, this would be approve the application by yada, 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 and with a modification, and then specify the wall from this home to that home.
If I understand your question, you have a specific application for a variance that in lieu of a wall, you'll have landscaping. So that has to be addressed one way or the other. It has to be either granted or denied. So if I understand your question, I mean, you've got other applications also, other than just the one for the wall variance, but in terms of...
His question was, do you throw the baby out with the bathwater? Do you lose the whole application if you say we want a wall? Do they have to start all over again? Or can we say we keep the application, but we want to put a wall up as well?
I think you have to address variance by variance in terms of what you want to do with each variance. You've got 7 variances, and then you've got a design review. And the design review, I think, since it's dependent upon both the wall and the parking variance, is probably going to be difficult to do the way they proposed it, because it's dependent upon both a parking allowance and the wall, something they've agreed that they could build. So, I mean, that's easy. But the rest of it is going to affect the main application, I believe, for the design review, because things like parking are going to be affected.
So with the options in front of us,
We don't have.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Let's just go
The
through
options in front of me would, and so just asking council's advice. 3, approve the application for the Pacific Valley Apartments and applications, modification to design the conditions of approval as proposed by the applicant, and direct staff to submit the written land use decision for approval by the city council at the next meeting. In that, can we include denying the variance F, or whatever variance is, and approve the application? I'm seeing nods. This is like a game show.
I believe if the variance you were talking about was the wall, I don't know
Right.
the reference, then I would say yes.
Okay.
I'm looking to see if.
So we can't approve the project, back to Councilor Carney's question, and with the denial of one of the variances, which then we still get landscaping and we get a wall.
You could deny the wall variance, but the rest of the project remains intact.
Thank you. Okay. Councilor Morris, another concern.
But if the variances aren't approved, then the project will not go forward, correct?
No, that's,
I mean, if we put a condition on the variance, like build a wall thing,
Yeah.
and they say, yeah, we're not gonna do that, we changed our mind, then the project will not move ahead.
so let me walk through some kind of the next steps, and I think this might be important. Assuming the project is approved in some form, the next step for them is to come forward with their building permits, engineering permits, site permits that are going to have to meet all the conditions of approval. If they don't move forward. So if, for example, you denied the variance for an architectural wall to be built, and they came in and said, we're not going to build one, they wouldn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
They couldn't proceed until they came back to some process and fixed it, or said, you know what, we're going to have to build it. Your approval is what they'll be stuck with.
Okay. All right. Issue 1. Councilor Morris, you mentioned you had other issues that...
I think we should go through the variances. That feels like if we go through the 7 variances, just step right through them, then I'm sure my stuff will get covered, which is parking. I got a lot of concerns about the parking because it sounds like it's gonna be a train wreck. And the wall thing, I think we've already sorted through, so.
Okay.
And Mr. Mayor, I think that's a good idea, because the thing is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but I mean, these are consolidated applications. You have 7 variance applications, and you have 1 design review application. So, I mean, and they're somewhat interdependent. So, I mean, unless you go through issue by issue, I mean, the planning commission didn't because they had a different record and a different deliberation. But, I mean, you need to go through application by application, and then you can sort of decide what's consistent and what isn't in terms of what you ultimately approve.
Okay. All right. Well, then I'll agree with Councilor Morris and the city attorney. So let's call them up. And number 1, street access minimum number. And can we get just a quick review for tired minds?
Don't we have to approve the project first?
This is part of the deliberations, and so I'm...
Yeah, I understand you're seeking a
Okay.
rundown of the variances to help you deliberate. So number 1, This one is critical because, as I mentioned before, the property's landlocked. There's only one frontage along the highway. And to attempt to have two driveways has some problems. First is that you have driveways that are not aligned with Alexander Street. And as you can imagine, that creates a lot of potential collision points when you have three offset travel ways intersecting the highway. The point of access management is to reduce potential points of conflict from turning vehicles. And so when you have a 4-lane highway with a centered left turn lane, it would get very messy. Plus the fact that fitting in an additional driveway means a drive aisle leading onto the property. So then you start disrupting the arrangement of buildings and parking, and it has this cascading effect.
Okay, so can I, just in interest of time, so having heard that short explanation, would anyone like to deliberate about that one?
I'm good with that.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Number 2 is pretty much the same as number 1.
Okay, excellent. Next one, which I expect some conversation.
Yeah.
Parking ratio minimum.
Number 3, if that's denied, that essentially torpedoes the entire project. Complete disarray and chaos.
Okay, so let's have some deliberation about the parking ratio minimum.
So I can start,
Please.
just because, hey, it's only 10:40.
Mhm.
I just think, and I think I spoke to it earlier, I don't think, and I just want to say, hey, I appreciate the applicant's work, because they've done a lot of work, and obviously it's a pretty high-speed setup, but I think the more, and just the community in general, people drive a lot of cars, and like we were talking about earlier, I own 3 cars, I don't drive any of them, but I own 3 cars. So I think it's short-sighted, no pun intended, to develop something that's outside the ordinance, when we already said, hey, two's the minimum, two's minimum for, I think that's what we talked about, because it's under the minimum 1.7 or 1.8. So I just think it's silly to tee it up that way. And the parking, especially parking outside of the complex, across 99E, that, I walk up and down 99E, and it's terrifying going at the crosswalk, so that's not a good thing. And I definitely have the same concerns that the local residents would have spilling over into their community, because that's gonna happen. I mean, it just will happen. So I think the parking thing is, I don't have a solution for that, but I definitely have a problem allowing a variance for that. And it's what we come back to every time we talk about the development ordinance, like, why have the standard when we thought through this process years ago when we did the development ordinance to set the standard? So it's like, let's throw the standard out the window every time somebody comes in with a variance. And some of these things, like the street access, it makes sense. I just can't wrap my head around supporting the parking one.
So I have a slightly different take on the parking. Like many of us up here who live in houses, I live in a house. I tend to collect stuff. When I lived in an apartment, I did not collect as much stuff. So among the stuff that I have collected is multiple vehicles. So when I lived in an apartment, we did not collect vehicles. So if it's a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom, I could see you having 1 car or 2 cars. Maybe when it's a 3-bedroom, maybe then the 17-year-old has a car. But when you're living in an apartment, I do think it's a little unrealistic to compare apples to oranges, because typically people that are living in apartments aren't collecting the cars like I know that people in houses do, because I'm guilty of having more cars than we have drivers.
I'm not a car collector, by the way. Just.
But you
just
have more
for the
cars than
record.
you have drivers.
Yeah, but I have 3 drivers, and I'm not one of them.
Okay.
So that's, yeah.
Okay, I have an example in Woodburn. I drive past Stonehenge Apartments 4 times a day. And in the morning, there are cars backed up and parked clear down almost to the bridge going over 214 in front of the cemetery. They didn't used to be able to be there because there was not parking, but now that they've fixed up Front Street, thank you very much, they have parking there. And there's no enforcement, there's no, you can't park here for, and so when funerals come through, they have trouble parking, for one thing. But I'll have to go along with Mr. Lubunsky. He did say that the parking, they would have to agree when they signed the lease, I'll only have 1 car, I'll only have 2 cars. But, you know, I'll only have, you know, things happen. I'll park it somewhere else, or maybe they won't catch up with me. But just because I promised I only have 1 car, somehow I have 4 now.
And I think that like the 1 bedroom for 1 car, I mean, I think about affordability, I doubt one person's going to be living in a one-bedroom apartment. So that means probably 2 adults. They probably work in different areas, probably one in Salem, one in Portland. They're going to have to drive different directions. So, I mean, I think that I agree with Councilor Morris. It's going to be hectic finding parking, and, you know, me previously living in apartments, I had to park on the street, and I mean, there's a big thing with like, is someone gonna break in? Am I going to come? And the thing is that, I mean, they've probably had this issue in Portland as well with the lack of, with there not being enough parking spaces. But yeah, I just think that it would be a big issue in the long run for a lot of people.
I'm very comfortable with the parking numbers, especially since the applicant has made the commitment to restrict the one-bedroom apartments to 1 car, and also the potential vacancy rate. When you put the numbers together, they all come out roughly to the 273 numbers that the applicant has come up with. So I'm very comfortable with it.
Councilor Shub?
I'm also comfortable with the parking. I realize, or just looking back on my life when I lived in an apartment, I had 1 car. And, you know, when people came to visit, and I was in a complex, they had to find some place to park. And you know, it curtailed some of my social activity, so I had to move those to other places. But I think that the way that the developer has, you know, the revisions to the design with moving Building C, and I know that they've lost those those 9 spaces, but what I felt the developer was trying to do was to accommodate the request of the people that were saying, hey, we don't want this 3-story apartment looking down on us. So they've really, you know, tried to address those things. So, like I say, I'm happy with the parking.
I think that's why I'm confident, because I'm not sure if because I wasn't here at the last meeting. I think they've obviously listened about the wall and the setback. I think if parking wasn't brought up before, they're obviously listening now. If we make it part of the denial and the variance deal, that they'll come up with a solution. I think that's because I don't feel like there's any ill will from either side. I mean, obviously the neighbors aren't happy about it, but the applicant is like, hey, we're willing to work out a solution, because they're obviously, you know, setting up a pretty nice place. But I have a feeling if we hold the line on the ordinance, that they'll come up with a solution, because it's a big investment that they want to be nice.
But I was under the impression if we denied the parking part, the whole application is null and void.
If they don't come up with a solution.
So
Is that right?
So can I ask,
Colin, could you clarify your comment?
Please.
So I will say, in the absence of the definitive statement from the applicant, we as planners, based on our experience generally with developers, is denial of the parking variance could so endanger the pro forma and profitability of the development that the project may or may not move forward. Of course, that financial information is private and held by the developer, so we, the planners, don't know.
I see.
I know this is, I just want to make everyone understand, if the variance is denied and they're required to put in the extra 38 spaces or 37 parking, I have no idea where they would go on site. And my next step in the process is they need to come in with a plan that does it and still looks just like the plan that you approved, unless you provide a condition that says, here's what's going to happen. So, again, there's a difference between your approval and denying some of the variances. This gets back to your question about, can we approve the project and still deny variances as part of it? I think that you can, things like the wall. I'm just saying it's much more problematic to deny the parking variance than the other ones that are up on that screen. Can something be done? That's honestly up to the applicant. That's not our job to do that. And your approval will be what it is when they walk out the door, or your denial.
So if I can summarize, the one thing that's in our purview, and I don't think we're going to, answer anything else, is we deny the parking variance. To the applicant, that would mean less units. I mean, there's not places for that, would mean less units. And then the applicant has to decide, if I'm hearing you right, if it's a profitable project or not. That's an option that's up to us.
It's true, but
So-
we haven't seen a plan that shows less units and parking in different locations where they find more spaces and how it gets landscaped and whether it meets fire. We have a whole process for going forward. The plan that's in front of you has gone through our review process. I have not seen the plan that we're kind of dreaming up here, and I think that's the staff's concern.
So my next question is to take us back. We had our housing needs analysis 2 weeks ago, and let me ask my first question. With other apartment complexes that we've approved in the last, long before I was mayor, that this body's approved, did we grant parking variances?
I did some research on this earlier, and I found out that I couldn't find any in the last, I think we've done 4 in the last 5 years. None of them did have variances. So there weren't any parking variances, I should say, for parking space variances. I did not find any others.
There are
Okay.
other
But
variances.
Yes. But I remember specifically, there was concerns about parking, that, you know.
So we
it
did
didn't
not
stop.
grant parking variances, and groups built apartments.
That is correct.
Yes.
To code with that.
And it was some fine.
Chris, wasn't, right, but though, I was here for those, I think, and talk a bit about site specific between, more urban restricted sites versus sites that have land adjacent to them.
And I can do that. You know, I think what's really important to understand about variances, and this gets to what the city administrator is talking about, is all variances are by definition and by law site-specific. It's not a precedent that gets established for other areas. You don't say, well, we've been giving out this variance like candy, so we'll keep giving it out. That's the opposite of what a variance is. A variance is a unique circumstance and situations to one particular site that require modification or waiver to that code provision in particular. And it's applicable here only. That's an important concept, because in other properties that might be sort of, they have more land. I'm thinking of, we had an approval about 1.5 years ago for a large multifamily apartment complex just behind the mall off of Arnie Lane.
Right.
Where at that point, the city actually came back and required that property to add parking to their site beyond what was required under the code. Now, that property had a lot of, frankly, extra land and spare land that they could do that. Sites that we're talking about along 99, along downtown, and these other areas are very, very constrained. They still have to meet our density requirements, setback requirements, bulk requirements, height requirements, et cetera. And to be frank, the challenge that we hear often is meeting the parking requirement. And that's get back to the comments that you were just referring to, Mr. Mayor, if that helps.
I'd like a point of clarification. I think I'd probably look to you, Bob, for this. I was under the impression that we were going to be voting on a consolidated project tonight, and that we weren't going to be offered the opportunity to pick and choose among these variances. Am I wrong about that?
These are consolidated applications, and that's a good question. I think the position I would take on that would be the same that the planning director just said, that basically, technically, they're consolidated, but they all need to be decided. So the ones like the wall, where the applicant said they do that, then that's one thing. The parking, if you were to, say, deny that variance, which I believe you could, then there'd be a question as to whether the site plan itself was viable, and that would really be up to the applicant. So I think they're interdependent, and they need to be separately decided. Under the statute, the applicant chose to consolidate the applications. And so that means under the state law that they're heard at the same time.
That's right. They're heard at the same time, and they'll be adjudicated at the same time.
Right, they would be. And then it's a question, like I said, of sort of viability and also what the applicant economically wants to do in terms of, for instance, just as a for instance, if you were to deny the parking ratio minimum variance, then, is that economically viable to do the site plan? Don't
Right.
know. That's up to the applicant.
So is the appropriate procedure to make a motion to approve the project and then go through 7 motions to approve the variances.
You could do that. One thing to keep in mind is that your actual decision, this is what we like to, planners and land use lawyers like to call this a tentative decision, because legally, your decision tonight is normally always going to echo the written land use decision. But you won't make a land use decision from a technical point of view that's appealable until we present to you a written document. So basically, just like I was talking about polling, and that seemed to be fairly successful. You were getting fairly far in terms of what you agreed to and what you didn't. What you need to do tonight is just whatever method you want, get some kind of an agreement so that staff knows what to put in the written document. So, I mean, you could go, as you're saying, application by application, and that would make some sense.
So Bob, just not to ask a stupid question, but do we have to make a decision on this tonight? Not for any other reason besides it feels like.
There's that 120 day.
Well, I understand the 120-day thing, but in the sense of, in different land use stuff, we've talked about keeping the record open. I'm not sure if I'm mixing up our procedures, but, it feels like there's not a super, if we just did a straight up vote, approve or disapprove, and I don't think, I think I'm personally looking for a solution. I'm not gonna say a win-win, a solution that everybody's fairly happy with.
Mm-hmm.
But I think right this second, if I'm getting a read on things and how things went last time, there's not consensus amongst the council about what we want or don't want. So is it something we can leave the record open and come back to another council meeting to give the applicant opportunities to respond to what they heard tonight during the testimony?
I guess my answer to that would be that statutorily, you could have left the record open. You didn't do that, but you could continue your deliberation. Like you say, really the factor there is the 120-day rule. So certainly if the council, it's getting to be the late hour and everything, if the council wanted to, on the existing record, just not decide it tonight, which is what you're suggesting, then you could. The difference would be that the record has been closed. That's pretty hard, and Chris is nodding. So that means that whatever decision you make is based on all of the testimony that you heard tonight, the Planning Commission's report and everything, which is in the record. I meant their deliberation and the entire Planning Commission packet, I should say, and the staff report. So everything you've heard tonight's in the record, plenty of information. So you wouldn't be leaving the record open, but you could be deferring your deliberation and decision. We might want to ask, Mr. Mayor, if we could, maybe we should ask the planning director, because I don't know the specifics on the 120-day rule.
So please, the timeline.
Pardon me. So the requirement is that this body make a final decision by January 9th of 2020. That means your final decision has to be presented into final findings, has to be signed by the mayor by January 9th. Unless the applicant offers to extend that 120-day clock. They can't be asked to extend that 120-day clock, but they can offer to extend 100-day. Can't be forced to extend their 120-day clock.
So Chris, our deliberations, if they were to be kept open, would be absent any new testimony.
That is correct.
Right.
So
Or
we
any
couldn't
new
have any
commitments
ex parte,
from anyone.
no ex parte contact, no
So we
no
couldn't talk to
discussions
any of you.
outside of the council
Chris,
chambers.
I'm sorry, just
I think we've
to
allowed
clarify.
ourselves to become monumentally distracted.
Well, just to clarify too, there's one meeting in December because of Christmas. So you would have to decide this in December, and then we would have to have a special meeting between then and January 9th, because in January, our council meeting does not fall in the week of the 9th. So you could deliberate and make a decision. You'd have to make that decision at the December meeting, and then we'd have to call a special city council meeting to adopt the written findings. So the question is, could you from the December to the 120-day rule draft the findings for the council, the planning department, because now they have to be under the gun to get that done. There's going to be notification requirements and other things too.
So we should probably put a vote on it tonight then.
Well, it's up to the council. We'll do whatever you want to do. It's just we could call a meeting. It would require a quorum of the council to come, and we'd be pretty tight. I think we can make it happen, but it really is dependent on your ability and the planning department's ability to draft those findings.
But what purpose does it serve us? We have all the information we need.
Right.
We've heard it all tonight. We've heard all the testimony. We understand the distress that the neighbors have, but we understand that we've got an excellent project here that we have the opportunity to approve. I don't understand why we continue to distract ourselves.
So can I ask my next question is about the presentation we had for the housing needs analysis that we have. And so some of you were here for that. So that presented recommendations for the city council to improve the amount of housing we have in the city, correct?
Mhm.
And if I remember, our consultant was recommending like lists of things that we could do to encourage housing. So, and this is I don't know how much more information I have about that, but other cities and other jurisdictions that are approving housing, how much have they relied on a variance for parking to, and that maybe your discussions with them. So this is a thing we haven't done before. We're clarifying that, but is it a thing that more people are doing to have more units? So, I mean, if I can say it out loud, we're talking about more or less units. One of our interests is to have more housing and more units in our city, right? Our other interest is to have apartment complexes where people can park to this issue. So we're like balancing those two things. So anyway, some state perspective from you.
Well, Mr.
The short answer is not having any specific data. I can What did I just say? Oh, yes, okay. Not having specific data, the best way I can answer your question is I know anecdotally that other cities in the region and across the country do require less parking through other means. It could be changing an ordinance. It could be having a special permit process. Different cities, different states do it differently. That's the most I can say with any accuracy, that there are places that require less parking per dwelling than Woodburn does.
Which isn't saying much. If you go to Portland, there's no parking in Portland.
Right.
So
Right.
That's true.
Yeah, the extremes from, I'm sure, Portland, and if you go down to, I don't know, K Falls or something, there's probably not the same. They probably have looser standards, I guess. Just depends on
Right.
where you're at.
And I know that the governor, it's slightly different, but when we were looking at accessory dwelling units, we, as a part of our ordinance, wanted to have extra parking for a unit, and the governor came back and said, nope, that's a unrealistic requirement. And a lot of cities like Woodburn actually had to take that parking requirement out of their ordinance. So I know that parking is a huge concern. That's in our neighborhood, we fight over parking, who can park in front of whose house, and trying to explain to my neighbors that street parking is not assigned parking, it's street parking. And earlier we heard testimony about people that don't park in their garages and using carports so that you're not storing them. So it is not an easy fix. It's not an easy decision. I struggle and I feel for the neighbors. At the same time, we've had a lot of discussions lately about affordable housing and the housing shortage in Woodburn and infill, and it's, 1 week we have, somebody comes before us and talks about we have no place to live. We need to bring housing, and we're all for housing, and then a big housing development comes in and it's a little bit of not in my neighborhood. And I wouldn't like it in my neighborhood either. I will be honest, I would not want this behind me. But at the same time, the neighbors that I have weren't of my choosing either.
Well,
Okay, Councilor Shaw.
thank you. Well, I was looking back at the memorandum for the housing need analysis, and one of the things that I really took notice of is that it was addressed in here to encourage high density, and we only have so much property in Woodburn. And I just believe, when I looked at this project, and I just thought, wow, they have really put together a professional-looking project. And having done real estate myself and worked with developers, it's not an easy task to put something together like this. And to have somebody come back and do these revisions to the design, like I said, I think is, it's showing that they're paying attention to the requests of the people that came here to say, hey, listen, you're disrupting my usual lifestyle. And I live in a neighborhood where I just have a 6-foot fence that divides my property from, I've got houses in back of me and on each side of me, and it's like, I'm lucky I have a fence. Other people just have a chain link fence, and you can see right into their backyards. And I've also lived where there's apartment buildings above. And I knew every once in a while somebody would be looking down, but you're just living with it. And,
But the thing is, you chose to live in all those places.
That's true.
They're already where they're at, and
I
they
know.
don't have a choice. They feel like they're being trapped.
I know, but they moved there, some of them, and it's been 47 years or so that that property has been open. And it was going to be developed sooner or later.
Right.
It's going to be a hospital.
It was, well, it could have been. So, progress that has to go forward. We need the housing.
I've heard my council colleagues, and I really think we need to take action. So I'm going to make a motion. I'm going to make a motion that we approve the application for the Pacific Valley Apartments DR 2019-03 and consolidated applications with the modifications to the design conditions of approval as proposed by the applicant to include the applicant's letter and nomination of change of improvements of the November 12, 2019 letter. And direct staff to submit the written land use decision for approval by the city council at the next meeting.
I second that.
We have a motion and a second.
It's been moved and seconded, and a clarification for the motion that would include the wall that.
I made no mention of wall.
It's in the letter,
It is?
isn't it?
I don't see.
No, it
Architectural
isn't.
wall.
It's the architectural one, not the actual.
Oh, okay.
'Cause it
The
says-
landscaping.
The landscaping wall.
Yeah, it says, item 4 on that memo says, landscaping between building C and the east property line is revised to increase the buffer to the neighborhood or neighboring lots. So I don't see,
But it's not the
I'm just trying
wall.
to speed
Which
it.
one?
actual
Which
wall.
one?
Architectural wall, the applicant shall
Okay.
include in landscaping.
Okay,
because this is what they're teeing, that's what it's teeing up.
okay, the driveway is reduced.
And it actually talks about the building C is like shorter, if I read that right.
11 feet.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm not sure, shorter, that's in length, not height, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. And are we doing,
We're gonna discuss it.
yep, so the next is the discussion about this, and
My discussion, I was just trying to read through it real quick, and I thought it said something about parking on here, but I don't, am I missing, do I have,
Yeah, near the
Off-street
bottom,
parking.
V,
what, like, a
PR, off-street
Parking
parking ratio.
ratio,
Near the bottom of the page.
right here.
oh, parking ratio minimum,
Oh.
okay.
So studio is one.
Oh, Jesus, okay, well,
A little more. Okay.
so it decreased by 0.05 stalls, okay.
And then to mention the wall, there is, here in the letter that they provided, it says landscaping. So 9 trees, of which at least 3 shall be large category. So they're only talking about the trees, not about the actual wall that we've been talking about.
Okay.
okay, so the motion on the floor is to adopt this without, currently without a wall. All right, so do we do roll call votes for this?
Counselor Ellsworth,
Aye.
Counselor Carney,
Aye.
Counselor Schaub,
Aye.
Counselor Cabrelas,
I don't know what I say to no.
Counselor Morris,
No.
Counselor Cornwell.
No.
We have a tie vote.
Okay.
Seriously?
Mayor Swenson?
Yeah, mayor votes.
So I'll vote no. Well, we're not done. So the next, we entertain a motion with the same motion that would include the wall, please?
Yes. I'll make that motion, the same motion. I move to approve the, I need the. It's 3. Thanks. To approve the application for the Pacific Valley Apartments, DR 2019-03, and consolidated applications with the modification to design and conditions of approval as approved by the applicant, and direct staff to submit the written land use decision for approval by the city council at the next meeting, to include a wall.
8 foot.
Or higher.
Would you want to cite the WDO thing, the architectural wall?
The arch.
So is that enough?
The-
Okay, that's good.
Is that enough?
6 to 9 foot is what,
Okay,
minimum and maximum.
okay, a 6 to 9 foot wall.
No, I'm saying,
So
I'm sorry, maybe I misunderstood the question. What is it you're looking for?
Her
the height of the
language to
wall.
specify
That you
the-
want, or that's required as a maximum?
That we want.
That's required as.
That's required.
Mr.
It's
Mayor,
6 to 9.
I'm sorry, it's getting kind of late, so we're kind of dopey. Heather, could you repeat the motion? Sorry to do that to you without any warning.
I can try.
Yes.
Approve the application for the Pacific Valley Apartments, DR 2019-03, and consolidate applications with the modification to design and conditions of approval as proposed by the applicant, and direct staff to submit the written land use decision for approval by the city council at the next meeting, and have it include the wall.
Chris, do you find that adequate direction to prepare written findings?
Yes, we do.
Mr. Mayor, and Counselor, then, just to make sure I understand, the wall would be required, and so that would mean that that everything would be approved except that the architectural wall variance would be denied.
Yes.
Correct.
Right, okay. That's why I thought I understood.
Okay, there's been a motion.
I'll second it.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. May we have a roll call vote?
We're not going to talk about it?
Oh, sorry. I'm a little punchy myself. Okay, discussion. Deliberation. Would you like to start?
Sure.
Okay.
I'll carry the conversation, and it's a little after 11. I'm ready to push through till midnight, so.
Okay.
I think my concern remains, even though there's a slight adjustment with the parking, the wall's great, but I still have the same concerns about parking. I think this motion doesn't do anything about that, so I will be voting no.
I agree.
I think you're correct about the parking, but I still think that there's enough parking.
I do too.
I have the same concern, my jumping to forward about parking. If they do choose to park across the street, what's gonna happen with the first accident? See, I told you so, we knew we shouldn't be parking across the street, and here, people are getting hurt or injured from trying to cross a 4-lane highway with turn lanes.
I think that if there was a viable alternative to parking, like if there was off-street parking, or the high-density unit that my daughter lives in now, they only have like a very limited parking at their unit, but there is
Right.
street parking outside of the unit, so there's places to park. That's kind of what I've come up with thinking about.
Maybe they would have to come up with purchasing more property eventually. I don't know.
Are we taking a vote?
We're
Call the
discussing.
question.
We're still deliberating, but we.
Okay, so I have one more deliberative question because it appears that it's going to come down to this microphone right here. So to clarify, that if we vote no for this, so we're denying the variance, then we're sending it back to the applicant, right? To come forth with a project that meets the parking requirements.
So I understand you're talking about the parking variance specifically, and essentially just means that as the applicant is preparing a written decision for your next meeting, the applicant will make a simple tweak to the site plan to show an architectural wall that meets code standards.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
And I'm getting tired. But my understanding of this motion is that the variance for the architectural wall, as we discussed, would be denied. The design review application would be approved. And as it is anyway, the other variances would also be approved. And the applicant in this record has already indicated that they would build a wall. So I mean, basically if this were to pass, then you would get the wall, they would get the parking ratio variance and the other variances. That's, I believe that's the motion maker could
That's the
correct me,
motion.
but I believe that's the nature of the motion that's on the floor.
That's a good summary.
Okay, so let me just throw this out there because this is where it's going to go, right? So if we vote no on this, then the next thing we could do is to entertain a motion that would ask them to build the wall and meet our parking ordinance.
Or you could have a friendly amendment to the motion, which I would propose,
Okay.
would be to deny the parking variance and deny the wall, is that the right
Right, the
variance?
wall.
Yeah, the architectural wall variance, and then approve the rest of it. With the friendly amendment, who made the motion?
Well,
If she would accept that to deny the parking variance.
But I believe the motion on the floor is that, the wall will go in, but the parking will stay the same.
Currently,
That's the current motion.
Yeah.
right.
So a yes vote gets that.
Yes.
Right.
And a no vote, either we try again or
Okay, so are you proposing a friendly amendment to?
I would propose that we deny the variance for parking, and so the motion would be that we accept everything, deny the variance for the wall, and deny the variance for parking.
Are you gonna make another motion?
Do we need to?
You can't, because there's one on the floor.
Yeah.
I'm not sure of the parliamentary procedure on that.
yeah, and I'm a pretty sharp person, but I don't know where they're gonna put more parking spaces.
I think
Yeah, there's no way.
from my
As I
thought
said, I'm
process-
very comfortable with the parking arrangements.
There's no way.
I gotta believe if people feel like there's not enough parking, they're not gonna rent. You know, they'll solve their own problems, or they'll start complaining, we don't have enough parking here, figure it out.
Move.
Yeah, they'll figure it out. I'd like to know what the rentals are, to know if one person could survive or in one bedroom, if they could afford to live there, or if it would take two people. But it's too late to ask that.
We didn't ask what the,
No.
No.
what the rentals,
And I'm sure
proposed
that'll
rentals.
vary.
Oh, God.
Okay,
Well, let's vote on
so
it.
we'll vote on this, and then if it doesn't pass, we'll entertain another motion.
You said,
So, Mr. Mayor, again, just to make sure I understand, I think that's wise. So basically what you've decided is that you decided that for clarity, you're going to vote on the motion that's on the floor.
Right.
And see what happens, and then if we need another motion, then we can have another motion.
Right, okay.
This is without the amendment, right? No amendment.
This is with, yeah.
Right, without the amendment.
Counselor Cabrales?
No.
Counselor Morris?
No.
Counselor Cornwell?
Yes.
Counselor Schaub?
yes.
Counselor Ellsworth?
Yes.
Counselor Carney?
Yes.
Passes 4-2.
Okay, the motion passes. That's been so long, I don't know what to do next.
You go home.
We move to adjourn?
So now we gotta see what's the next part.
Oh, my gosh.
Once again, as you're leaving, I want to thank all the people just for being here. I thank the applicant. I do want to thank all the people who came to speak about the project. And if I could take a quick picture of democracy in action, people shaking hands. God bless you. God bless America for getting through this and working through this together. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
We do have a few more things to vote on too, so
Do we?
I think I'll allow like 2 minutes for the city manager to come back and people
Yeah, that'd be good.
before we go. I see when kids get up to leave in class, like, okay, you're dismissed.
Hey, thanks for coming.
Thank you for your flexibility. I hope you continue to.
Daniel and your family is. Your youngest brother, super red hair. I was his principal once. I'm sorry. Yeah, me too. How's he doing now?
I don't think we have any more business.
Yeah, 3 more.
I just one of my he's probably the same year as Daniel. I just a student incarcerated for 3 years. I found him a couple days ago. Mom's in the National Guard. He's doing fine now. It's what he needed. So. Yeah.
That's all right.
No, it's
Right. Oh yeah.
not all right. Especially when I think we got that's interesting.
Okay, we'll tell him I said hello, and I'll talk to him when he gets out.
No.
Say hello to your brother Alex for me. Alex and I.
Yeah, of course.
Say hello to Alex, younger Alex, not the older one. The one that went to the door program, the evening program.
Yes.
Well, you used to live
Alex
next
and I
door
have
to
had our
him.
run-ins.
This is one of those that's really hard being counselor.
Your family.
Right, yeah. And you have family that just lives like right off Brown Street in that little. Correct. Is that that's where Daniel? You grew up maybe.
Because, you know, there wasn't ample parking for
I can remember sitting in the office with him. It was me and him. Right? He was like, he was a force.
Most of their benefits. Yeah, there was a few about parking, but most of it, they're going on me, and our driver was going, and
He went to
years and years.
It's not like he didn't think.
I remember Alex telling me that.
Exactly. And then.
No, I'm the president of the Homeowners Association. In Tukwila. Right. And Alex and I had some questions about the
Story.
construction.
And then, you know, 5 feet, I mean, it's ridiculous.
All right. Well, that's my
I
one
know
good thing I
parking's
didn't
good,
vote it.
but there's also a possibility there's
I
streets
do
gonna
see in the
be-
future.
there's
I see when people
proposed
are driving
streets.
less, and driving smaller cars,
And I thought,
and
okay,
more
that's
public
one thing.
transportation.
You know,
I'm just worried about people like literally trying to park somewhere. Maybe they'll park at shoes.
I think so. Don't take it. Thank you.
and by the time it was built, you know,
But I think that's the future. People are they're going to be able to jump on the bus and
we did.
When Alex used to come to check your homes in Tukwila, he used to drive up in this big black limousine. And he always had a very beautiful girlfriend.
Thank you, we could use it, we just had to, you know, we
And
have
I always remember the young man that you had that always did your finishing work.
$333, you know.
Very nice kid, tall, good-looking boy.
So anyway.
I don't think we'll have
Because I challenged him one time on the roofing. I told him I wanted to have a better grade of roofing. And he said,
We're not done yet.
He said,
We're
"Let me
not
show
done
you
yet.
what it is."
Counselor Morris.
They're not. I spent a couple years on the
Counselor Morris,
planning
it's true
commission.
that we do only have a small bit of business left, maybe a minute, once we reconvene.
Oh, Susan, yes.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I spent a couple years on the planning commission, so I.
We're not gonna have a quorum pretty soon.
Oh, we haven't adjourned yet. You want to get home to your baby?
Yes, he's sleeping already.
Is your husband still back there?
Are you still alive?
No, thanks.
Paul? Are you still alive?
Yeah, you can.
How come you didn't testify? You should have testified.
I don't even know that.
If you're here, you need to be testifying.
I told you not to.
Mr. Mayor, can we finish our meeting, please? Some of us are not retired and have to work in the morning.
You're not presenting, are you?
Okay.
Taking it apart to get Heather out of here.
Alrighty. So, I don't know if I can call something back to order that lost order, but, okay. So we are back in focus.
Call up breathing.
Yeah. All right. So we're on
Planning
number 13, Planning Commission Administrative Land Use Actions. And here are call-up briefings about approval modifications for Salem Health Clinic. Yeah. So I've invited the Salem Health Clinic here to talk about it, and some opposition from the Salem Health Clinic, if nobody minds. No, come back.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. So can we get a quick staff report on these, or are we just going to call them right up?
I don't have any issues with the call briefings.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean-
Anyone like to call up any of these things? Three things. Okay.
No.
Then I don't have any red lines that say we're not calling them up. Next thing. May we have the shortest city administrator's report in history?
I have no reports.
Are there any council members who?
I'm tired.
No, thanks. Nothing to report.
I just want to say how much I greatly respect the planning commission for the work that they do, because I think this is what they do all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, thanks to all of you for a passionate and thoughtful and reasonable discussion that we were able to carry on for 4.5 hours. Am I right here? Like, or more? So.
It wasn't a record, but it was close.
It wasn't a record, it's cool. Again, thanks for the staff who walked us through, particularly Mr. Kerr, and Colin, who helped us through that, and the people who just basically sat through it, like you had to listen to it also. Blessings upon you.
I'm sorry.
All right, with that,
I move we adjourn.
okay, everybody move to adjourn, everybody second, the meeting's
Yes.
adjourned. Happy Thanksgiving, and we shall see you in December. Huh?
Do we have a meeting this Thursday?
Yes, we do have a meeting. Do we want to cancel this? Just like.
And the ordinance.
Yeah.
Oh, all of it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.